Chapter 137. The group of people at the entrance was none other than the disciples of supporting Immortal's island, who had failed to reach Foundation establishment, and were expelled from the sect. Leading them was Ling Feng and the other two. They followed Yu Qianqiu's instructions, and brought them to the Pillar General's residence. Most of these people had spiritual roots, and were brought to supporting Immortal's island from a young age. Many years had passed, and the youngest among them had not interacted with the secular world for close to 20 years. They were expelled from the sect, and had nowhere to go. With Ling Feng and the other two leading the way, they naturally followed them. However, Ling Feng and the other two did not tell them that they were under Yu Qianqiu's arrangements. When they heard the conversation between Ling Feng and the gatekeeper, and found out that Yu Qianqiu was involved, they looked at each other in astonishment. Seeing such a rich and powerful residence, the three of them could not help but feel a trace of apprehension. They were a little suspicious of Yu Qianqiu's words. The Pillar General was similar to the Wei and Ping generals. The military power of the Wuxia Empire was divided among the three of them. Their status was not something ordinary people could hope to achieve. They had heard of this before, and did not believe that Yu Qianqiu would be related to such a person. However, since things had come to this, they could only brace themselves and give it a try. When they heard the shout from inside, the three of them finally heaved a sigh of relief. It was clear that Yu Qianqiu's name was indeed effective. The vermilion-red door of the residence let out a dull sound and quickly opened. 2 rows of servants stood on either side. A handsome young man with a golden crown in his hair and embroidered robes with a jade belt around his waist walked out, and looked around joyfully. When he saw the travel-worn appearance of the group, he was slightly taken aback. He paused for a moment before asking doubtfully, "I am Shi Xiaotian. Are you all looking for me?" When he heard the servant's report, he did not think much of it. He felt that the servant was looking down on him. At this moment, he also suspected that these people were sent by that person. Otherwise, why would they be in such a sorry state? After being in a rich and powerful family for so long, he had forgotten how he looked when he returned from Ongquangsung. He was even worse than them. The expression of the servant who went to report sank. They had actually lied to him. They grew up overseas and did not have much experience. This was the first time they saw such a dignified young master. Looking at themselves, they felt a little resentful. Ling Feng cupped his fist and said, "You are Shi Xiaotian. It is Uncle Master Yu Qianqiu who ordered us to find you." "Uncle Master?" Shi Xiaotian looked him up and down. He seemed to be slightly older than Yu Qianqiu. He was a little worried, so he probed, "Where are you from?" "Supporting Immortal's island," Ling Feng said with a little pride. As soon as he said this, everyone became confident. Although they were expelled from the sect, the position of the sect was enough for them to be proud of. The name of the #1 sect in the cultivation world was not just for show. Sure, sect of the sect of the other sect. Excited. Sure, sect out of the sect disciple sect of the sect of the other of sect. As he spoke, he looked at the servants on both sides, extended his hand, and made an inviting gesture. "This is not the place to talk. Everyone, please follow me." The decency of a wealthy family in the secular world was indeed a big blow to these people. It was a completely different concept from the fairyland of the supporting Immortal's island. Perhaps it was because they had stayed in the supporting Immortal's island for a long time, but their sense of beauty had completely changed. They were a little surprised by the luxury of the general's residence. They constantly looked around and praised in their hearts. Shi Xiaotian didn't dare to be negligent in the slightest. Not only did he lead the way, he also kept making inviting gestures. Sometimes, the servants passing by couldn't help but glance at him. Why was the third young master so polite to a bunch of country bumpkins? The former led everyone to the back garden where Yu Qianqiu used to live. However, it had become his residence now, and the garden was still a forbidden area. Other than him, no one was allowed to enter. In the small courtyard of the back garden, the pile of spirit stones that Yu Qianqiu left for him was still there. Even though everyone came from the world's #1 cultivation sect, they had never seen such a big pile of spirit stones before. Moreover, these were just some ordinary disciples. They were all speechless. As expected of a wealthy family, Even the spirit stones were exposed so casually. However, they didn't know Shi Xiaoyan's pain. Seeing these spirit stones every day was torture to him. In the cultivation world, it was a good thing, but in the secular world, people would have to think twice before exchanging it for a meal. Moreover, Shi Xiaotian hadn't built his foundation, so he didn't dare to absorb the spiritual energy inside. Normally, he only dared to look at it but didn't dare to use it. After inviting the guests from the supporting Immortals Island to sit in the hall, Shi Xiaotian impatiently asked Ling Feng, "Old, why didn't your martial uncle you come? What did he ask you to bring me?" The first thing that came to his mind was the foundation building pill. Ling Feng told him what Yu Qianqiu wanted him to find Shi Xiaotian. Then, he took out the porcelain bottle that he carefully kept and gave it to Shi Xiaotian. Once Shi Xiaotian received it, he immediately opened the seal and poured the contents into his palm a few times. However, he realized that there was nothing inside. He couldn't help but look at Ling Feng in confusion. Ling Feng and the other two's expressions changed as well. It was actually an empty bottle. Yu Qianqiu actually asked them to bring an empty bottle as a gift? Shi Xiaotian squinted his eyes and looked into the bottle. There was indeed nothing inside. He then put it under his nose and sniffed it. He couldn't help but frown. There was nothing inside other than the smell of blood. He slowly raised his head and looked at the crowd. He said indifferently, "What is the meaning of this? Are you trying to fool me? Or is the thing inside the bottle being hidden by someone? Give me an explanation." He had been a person of status for a long time. When he was serious, he could indeed put some pressure on others. The atmosphere in the hall became heavy. The other disciples also looked at Ling Feng, and the other two. Ling Feng snatched the bottle from his hand. After checking it again, he realized that there was nothing inside. He muttered, "How can this be? I've never opened the bottle before. Could it be that martial uncle you gave us an empty bottle? He came all the way here to deliver such a small empty bottle? Do you really think I'm an idiot?" Shi Xiaotian glanced at everyone coldly and said in a deep voice, "I think everyone should first prove your identity. Otherwise, my general's residence isn't a place that you can come and go as you please. Speak. Who are you people? How do you know that I know Yu Qianqiu?" He shouted. "Yo, I haven't seen you for a few years. Your temper has grown." Suddenly, a mocking voice came from the back of the hall. Shi Xiaotian suddenly turned around and shouted, "Who is it? Get out here." Following a burst of laughter, a person swayed out from the back of the hall. He stared at Shi Xiaotian with a smile and sighed. "You have guts. You actually dare to speak to me like this. Why, can't you recognize my voice after being separated for a few years?" Everyone stood up. This person wasn't a stranger to everyone. He was a famous person on supporting Immortals Island. He was once an honored guest of the State Pillar General's residence. He was Yu Qianqiu. All the disciples bowed and said, "Martial uncle Yu." Ling Feng and the other two looked at him in disbelief. Wasn't he on supporting Immortals Island? How did he come here in a blink of an eye? Boss. Shi Xiaotian said in shock. Yu Qianqiu raised his hand to indicate that there was no need to be so polite. He turned to Shi Xiaotian and patted his shoulder with a smile. "Young man, you have quite a temper. How dare you shout at me?" Shi Xiaotian stuttered for a long time. In the end, he bowed with a surprised expression. "Boss." Yu Qianqiu turned around with a smile. He walked to the chair in the main hall and sat down. He looked at everyone. Chapter 138. Seeing everyone's doubtful expressions, Yu Qianqiu smiled faintly. In fact, he had already heard the conversation between him and Shi Xiaotian. His gaze landed on the porcelain bottle in Ling Feng's hand, and his smile widened. He had been cultivating arduously for more than a year, trying to make various breakthroughs. One time, he had cultivated the Guyuan sword technique, wanting to make a breakthrough, but in his anxiety, he had ended up injuring himself. When he returned to supporting Immortal Island, he realized that there were bloodstains on his clothes, so he casually tossed them down the Alchemy Pavilion's mountain, and did not take it to heart. A few days later, when he was cultivating in Utopia, He unintentionally realized that he could sense the scene in an unfamiliar place outside. This feeling could only be felt when he had entered Utopia the last time. Curious, he locked onto it with his divine sense and tried using the method to exit. In the end, he discovered that he was already in the back mountain of the Alchemy Pavilion. When he discovered the blood-stained shirt that he had abandoned previously, he immediately thought of a possibility. He reckoned that it was a benefit brought about by his cultivation breaking through again. Therefore, he dripped his blood in several places on supporting Immortal Island to test it out. Indeed, he could easily sense the surroundings of every drop of blood essence in Utopia. After repeated attempts, he could use Utopia as a medium to quickly appear where there was blood essence. The porcelain bottle that he had asked Ling Feng and the other two to bring did not contain anything other than a drop of his blood essence. His main purpose was to test Utopia's long-distance teleportation ability. He had asked the three of them to bring that drop of blood essence to the National Pillar General's residence, which was why he could appear here. Of course, this was his secret, and it was not convenient for him to let the people in front of him know. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Ling Feng and the other two and said indifferently, "Ling Feng, I remember the three of you saying that as long as I can help you succeed in building your foundation, you'll be willing to listen to my orders. Does that still count?" The three of them looked at each other and thought about how Yu Qianqiu had been able to leave supporting Immortal Island secretly and appear here silently. Since he had such means, he was definitely not lying about building his foundation. Therefore, they bowed in unison and said, "Of course it counts." The other disciples were shocked when they heard that Yu Qianqiu could actually help the three of them build their foundation. For a moment, everyone's thoughts became active, and they looked at the three of them enviously. Shi Xiaotian was also a little excited. Since Boss had the ability to help them build their foundations, he would naturally be able to help himself. However, he had been with Yu Qianqiu for more than a year, and was very familiar with him. He knew that there was more to this sentence. Yu Qianqiu nodded. He looked at the others and smiled. "What are your plans? Are you willing to serve me like the other three?" Everyone looked at each other, their expressions becoming excited. Someone stepped forward and bowed, saying, "Martial Uncle Yu, if you can guarantee that this disciple will successfully build his foundation, this disciple is willing to listen to Martial Uncle's orders." "I always pay what I say." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "If you can't successfully build your foundation, you naturally don't need to listen to my orders, and you also don't need to take my words seriously. Go do what you need to do. Is there anyone among you who is willing to be like him?" As he said that, he took out a few foundation building pills that were shrouded in purple mist. Everyone's eyes lit up. Apart from Shi Xiaotian, everyone had seen them before, so they naturally knew that these were foundation building pills. Shi Xiaotian also naturally understood from everyone's gazes. In an instant, the crowd's emotions flared up. Who wouldn't want to make such a foolproof deal? Even if they couldn't successfully build their foundation, they wouldn't lose anything. They immediately stepped forward and bowed, saying, "If we can successfully build our foundation, this disciple is willing to listen to Martial Uncle Yu's orders." Since there were foundation building pills, Boss definitely wouldn't forget about them. Shi Xiaotian stood at the side very confidently, not saying a word. Good. Yu Qianqiu said with a smile, but he snorted coldly in his heart. As expected, they were all people who refused to suffer losses. Each of them emphasized that they would only listen to his orders after they successfully built their foundation. They all thought that he was a philanthropist. Very good. He placed the few foundation building pills in his hand on the tea table beside him. Then he took out a whole bunch and placed them on the table, instantly attracting everyone's attention. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "Words are no proof. Those who are willing to listen to my orders will first take one as proof. If one foundation building pill is not enough, you can still come to me to take it." As he said that, he took out another handful from his storage bag. Shi Xiaotian's jaw dropped as he watched. He thought to himself, Boss is indeed boss. The foundation building pills that An Kuang-sung treats as treasure are actually given out by Boss as wedding candies. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Finally, someone couldn't resist the temptation and walked over to Yu Qianqiu and bowed deeply. When the latter nodded, He excitedly took one and retreated to the side, as if he was afraid that someone would snatch it from him. Sometimes, one was afraid that no one would take the lead. Since someone took the lead, everyone would naturally follow suit, taking turns to bow and salute, then unceremoniously took the pills and retreated. In the blink of an eye, there were only 11 foundation-building pills left on the tea table. Yu Qianqiu looked at Shi Xiaotian Lingfeng, and the other two who didn't follow the crowd's bad example. He smiled and said, "Xiaotian, take the foundation-building pills on the table and share them with those 3 brothers." For people actually had to share 11 foundation-building pills. Everyone's face was filled with envy. Yes, such a good thing. Shi Xiaotian couldn't hold back the smile on his face anymore. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue, no longer looking like a noble young master. Holding the foundation-building pills in his hand, he walked in front of Lingfeng and the other 2. Without saying a word, he gave each of them 3 foundation-building pills. He held 2 and was about to retreat. Who knew that the 3 of them wouldn't take it? They each wanted to give one to Shi Xiaotian, but the latter was determined not to accept it. Looking at the adult version of Kong Rong, Yu Qianqiu felt a toothache. This daddy here has plenty of foundation-building pills. Why do I need you guys to be good people? His face darkened and he shouted, "All right, stop being disgusting." The 4 of them retreated embarrassedly. Yu Qianqiu stood up and looked around at everyone. Expressionlessly he said, "I don't like empty promises. The foundation-building pills in everyone's hands are proof of my advance payment. But you guys can't just say empty promises. You have to show me some sincerity. What do you guys say?" Everyone looked at each other. They were all disciples who were chased out of Fuxian Island. Other than the pitiful amount of spirit stones they had, they really couldn't take out anything else to show their sincerity. They didn't know what to say. There really wasn't a free lunch in this world. Shi Xiaotian looked at the foundation-building pills in his hand. His face twitched unnaturally. Just as he took a step forward and called out, Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "We'll talk about the 4 of you later." Heh. Nobody said anything. Yu Qianqiu crossed his arms in front of his chest and smiled. "Then I'll take the initiative to ask you guys for something. Something that all of you have, how about it? Something that everyone has?" Everyone looked at themselves and suddenly felt a chill run down their spines. A disciple came out and bowed. "Uncle Master Yu, I wonder what we have that can catch your eye?" "Aha! Don't get the wrong idea. I'm not interested in your body parts. I just want something that doesn't matter. For example," Yu Qianqiu paused and smiled. "For example, give me your natal primordial spirit. With this proof I can be at ease." "What?" everyone exclaimed. Their faces turned pale. If they handed over their natal primordial spirit, wouldn't their lives be in danger? That disciple bowed again and said, "Uncle Master, you're joking too much. If that's the case, then I don't want this foundation-building pill anymore." As he spoke, he walked to the side of the tea table and returned the foundation establishment pill. Then, a few more people gritted their teeth and walked out to return the foundation-building pill. The rest of them were obviously hesitant. Yu Qianqiu looked at them coldly and suddenly laughed. "You guys really don't stand on ceremony. You guys take my things as you please and return them as you please. Since you guys don't stand on ceremony, then I won't stand on ceremony either. All of you who took my foundation-building pill, leave your natal primordial spirit behind. Don't even think about leaving." Just as he finished speaking, among the people who were still holding on to the foundation-building pill, someone suddenly leaped out of the hall. In the blink of an eye, he was about to jump over the wall. It seemed like he wanted to escape with the pill. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly and narrowed his eyes. Chapter 139. Clang! A cold light suddenly flashed in front of everyone's eyes, heading straight for the disciple who was about to jump over the wall. The cold light pierced through the person's figure, causing a flower of blood to blossom in the air. The disciple lost his balance and let out a miserable scream that echoed throughout the general's residence. Before the scream had even subsided, a second, third, fourth, one after another, cold lights flashed out from the hall. Their target was still the disciple who was still in the air. Nearly 100 cold lights swarmed over like a flock of crows fighting for food. In a few blinks of an eye, the scream stopped and the disciple could no longer be seen. All that could be seen was a bloody mist in the air. The cold lights were faintly discernible, and occasionally, pieces of cloth would fall. Suddenly, nearly 100 cold lights seemed to have received an order, and shot out from the bloody mist, shooting into the hall. Everyone followed the direction of the cold lights, and one by one, they entered the storage pouch on Yu Qianqiu's waist. One of the cold lights slowed down, and turned into a flying sword that flew around Yu Qianqiu's body. After a few rounds, it flipped over and with a clang sound, it went straight into the sword sheath on Yu Qianqiu's back. Heavens! Only now did everyone realize that the nearly 100 cold lights were all flying swords. They had never seen anyone control so many flying swords at once. A gust of wind blew outside, causing the leaves on the trees in the courtyard to rustle. Everyone looked over, and saw the bloody mist being blown away by the wind. The scattered pieces of cloth on the ground were blown away, and the walls were dyed with a layer of blood. A thought flashed through everyone's mind. Not a single corpse left. Yu Qianqiu stared at the bloodstains on the wall, and the pieces of cloth on the ground. He felt slightly regretful. The power of these 100 flying swords was far from what he had imagined. Otherwise, there shouldn't be any bloodstains and pieces of cloth left behind. They should have all been turned into ashes. What happened just now, although it was said to be slow, it was actually only a matter of a few moments. The hall became completely silent. None of the disciples dared to make a sound. They were all intimidated by the power of the group of swords. Those who had the same thought turned pale and completely gave up. They knew that there was no way they could escape this kind of attack. Was this the power of a foundation establishment cultivator? Shi Shaotian looked at the silent Yu Qianqiu and clenched his fists tightly. His face was flushed and he was actually trembling with excitement. The goal that the two of them had been fighting for many years had been realized by boss before him. Who dares to fight here? Do you want to die? A loud shout rang out, and then 7 figures appeared on the courtyard wall. 7 middle-aged men in plain robes with sharp eyes stood on the wall of the courtyard, and observed the situation inside. Do you want to die? Yu Qianqiu was slightly annoyed. 7 cold rays of light shot out from his storage bag at lightning speed towards the 7 of them. Shi Shaotian suddenly shouted, "Boss, help!" The 7 flying swords were pressed against the throats of those 7 people. If Shi Shaotian had not shouted in time, there would have been a bloody hole in their necks. The faces of the 7 people on the wall immediately turned ashen, not daring to move. How could a person who could use a flying sword be ordinary? Yu Qianqiu coldly stared at Shi Shaotian. The latter smiled bitterly and begged, "Boss, please let them go. They are not ordinary servants. They are the retainers of the general's estate. They have been loyal to my family for generations, and are my father's most trusted subordinates. They have been protecting the safety of the estate and my family for a long time. They didn't mean to offend you, boss." Yu Qianqiu thought about it, and felt that it made sense. They had probably rushed over after hearing that disciple's scream. He looked back at the 7 people on the wall, and saw that they were all standing there, giving off the airs of heroes. However, their faces were pale from fear. He nodded slightly and said, "Tell them not to tell anyone about what happened here." The 7 cold rays of light returned to his storage bag. "Don't worry, boss. They will know even if you don't tell them." Shi Shaotian turned around and walked into the courtyard. He cupped his hands towards the 7 people on the wall and said, "7 uncles, please leave. There is nothing wrong here, don't worry." The 7 of them also knew the rules of the estate. No one was allowed to come here. If they hadn't heard the scream, they wouldn't have rushed over. The leader in the middle looked at the bloodstains at his feet. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was sitting high up in the hall, and bowed to Shi Shaotian. "Third young master, be careful. We will leave first." The 7 of them returned to the courtyard. This was just a small episode. When Shi Shaotian turned around and returned to the hall, he was instantly stunned. There was a big group of people just now, but now only Yu Qianqiu and Ling Feng were left. Ling Feng and the other 2 looked at Yu Qianqiu in shock. Just now, Yu Qianqiu's figure flashed through the crowd, and everywhere he went, people disappeared into thin air. More than 10 people disappeared just like that. They could see it clearly, but they were confused by it. Ling Feng pointed at the place where the people disappeared and said in shock, "Martial uncle, don't worry, they are fine. I just sent them to another place." Yu Qianqiu smiled. These people were all Chen Feng's assistants. Otherwise, it would be difficult for Chen Feng to guarantee the logistics of the small army alone. After sending them to Utopia, his sister would naturally control their natal primordial spirits first. Martial uncle, this. The three of them clearly found it hard to accept this reality. "Alright, you don't have to call me martial uncle anymore. Just call me boss like little Tian." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand. "Moreover, I have already reached the core formation stage. Calling me martial uncle is a bit outdated. I should be calling you grandmaster. But you are no longer disciples of Fuxian Island, so you can forget about calling me grandmaster. Just call me boss." The four of them were stunned. He had already reached the core formation stage? Shi Xiaotian said in surprise. "Boss, you have really reached the core formation stage?" Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes at him and waved his hand. "Let's not talk about this. While I am here, I can protect you. The four of you should hurry up and build your foundation. After that, I have something for you to do." The four of them nodded in surprise and sat down cross-legged in the hall. They consumed the pills and focused on refining them. Not long after, the painful process of building their foundation gradually appeared on the four of them. Yu Qianqiu sat down at the side and looked at the four of them silently. He already had plans for the four of them. He needed them to run around and do some things for him outside. As long as they did not enter Utopia, there was no need to strip away their natal primordial spirits. Otherwise, it would be easy for people with high cultivation levels to see through them. As for Shi Xiaotian, he had entered Utopia once, but he had been trapped in an array and did not know anything. Among the four of them, Shi Xiaotian was the most talented. Yu Qianqiu gave him another foundation establishment pill, and he succeeded in building his foundation with only 3. Although Ling Feng and Bei Zi had succeeded with 3 pills each, they had also used 3 pills on the supporting Immortal Island. Lu Xianping, on the other hand, had to use 5 pills to succeed. Shi Xiaotian did not say anything. After Ling Feng and Bei Zi succeeded, they tried their best to suppress their excitement. They knelt in front of Yu Qianqiu and said some words of gratitude. Xianping, who succeeded in the end, kowtowed 3 times without saying a word. Then, Shi Xiaotian led the 3 of them to wash up, and stood in front of Yu Qianqiu in high spirits. Ling Feng and the other 2 looked at Yu Qianqiu as if they were looking at their parents again. It was difficult for outsiders to understand their feelings of being pulled back from the brink of despair. However, this was what Yu Qianqiu needed after years of planning. "This is a storage bag for you." Yu Qianqiu threw a bag to Shi Xiaotian. When Shi Xiaotian caught it, he was stunned at first. Then he burst into laughter and thanked him profusely. "Thank you, boss. Thank you, boss." He had been drooling over this legendary item for a long time. "What are you laughing at?" Yu Qianqiu's words immediately made him stand to the side, but he still kept touching the bag in his hand. Yu Qianqiu tapped his finger on the tea table beside him, and pointed at the 4 jade archives, for large porcelain bottles, and 4 swords on the table. The jade disc contains supporting Immortal Islands supporting Immortal Sword technique, and the bottle contains vitality pills. Each of you, take them and cultivate diligently. Don't be lazy. The 4 of them were pleasantly surprised. They had just built their foundation. And now, Yu Qianqiu had prepared everything they needed. Where else could they find such a good boss? The 4 of them took their things and thanked him profusely. Shi Xiaotian laughed so hard that he almost fainted. He hugged the pile of things, his mouth wide open. Happiness came too suddenly, and there was nothing he could do about it. However, he did not notice that Yu Qianqiu's expression gradually darkened when he saw Shi Xiaotian's behavior. Chapter 140. Ling Feng tugged at him, and Shi Xiaotian immediately reacted. He smiled awkwardly and placed the items in his hands into his storage pouch. Frivolous. Yu Qianqiu harumphed and looked at them for a while before saying, "There are some things I need you to do. Ling Feng, the 3 of you will stay here for now. Once your cultivation reaches a certain level, the three of you will split up and travel around the Wuxia Empire, cultivating while traveling. First, to broaden your horizons, and second, to gather some disciples with spiritual roots. Don't worry about what I do. In short, as long as they are not affiliated with any sect, regardless of their age, bring them all here. The more the better. I have a use for them. Remember, try to keep a low profile and don't let the other sects find out. Oh right, if you don't have any money in the secular world, you can ask little Tian for it. I believe the general's mansion is not short of money. This is what I want the three of you to do, don't slack off. Shi Xiaoyan's face twitched unnaturally. Ling Feng and the other two looked at each other. Traveling and cultivating at the same time, there was actually such a good thing. However, from Yu Qianqiu's expression, it seemed like this matter was very important. They immediately cupped their fists and said, "Boss, we understand." Yu Qianqiu nodded and took out 4 small silver balls. He passed them to the 4 and said, "These are hollow inside. I have placed something inside. If you encounter danger outside and can't save yourself, you can use your divine sense to check. When the time comes, someone will come to save you. Remember to keep it well." Something that could save lives was indeed a good thing. The 4 carefully kept it. Shi Xiaotian looked at the 3 of them. It seemed like they had all been assigned tasks, except for him. This was too much of a blow to his confidence. He couldn't help but ask, "Boss, what should I do?" "You?" Yu Qianqiu glanced at him and said coldly, "Go do what you need to do. Do your old profession." Shi Xiaotian was startled and said, "Boss, what old profession do I have?" "Yes, why not?" Yu Qianqiu patted his shoulder and said, "Your matter is very important. You should use your identity as the general's 3rd young master to befriend the nobles in the capital. Don't neglect eating, drinking, and playing." Ling Feng and the other 2 turned their heads to the side. Shi Xiaoyan's face darkened, and he said stiffly, "Boss, you call this a very important matter?" "Yes, very important." Yu Qianqiu glared fiercely at him, his expression solemn as he said, "I want you to thoroughly investigate all the officials of the 5th rank and above in the Wuxia Empire, as well as their families. Then record everything down for me." As he spoke, he handed several jade archives to Miao Yi. "Ah." Shi Xiaotian took the jade archive and stood rooted to the ground. A thought flashed through his mind. Was boss planning to rebel? Otherwise, why would a cultivator want this thing? Seeing his expression, Yu Qianqiu knew what he was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't think too much. It's not what you think. You'll know when the time comes. All right, I still have some matters to attend to. Just do as I say." Hearing his words, Shi Xiaotian felt relieved. He cupped his fists at Ling Feng and the other 2 and said, "Understood." Another night passed, and the sky outside was already beginning to brighten. Yu Qianqiu walked into the courtyard, and the long sword on his back was unsheathed with a chong sound. With his hands behind his back, he turned into a streak of light and flew away. The 4 who were sending him off were fascinated by the sight. Shi Xiaotian even cried out, "Boss, you're too awesome. This won't do. I must learn this as soon as possible." On a mountaintop on the outskirts of the capital, Yu Qianqiu stood silently for a long while. His body was already drenched from the dew. At this moment, the rays of the rising sun were so blinding that he had to close his eyes. He stood there, waiting for the sun to rise. Everything was bathed in a layer of gold. He turned to look at the densely populated capital of Wuxia, and mumbled, "So many beauties have fallen to the hands of countless heroes. Since the heavens sent me here, I'd be letting myself down if I don't do something. Xiaotian, if you were to sit on the throne one day, I wonder how you'd feel?" Facing the rising sun, he stretched lazily. Thinking about the place he was going to, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. Time really passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, it had been almost 10 years. He wondered how his father, who had helped him clean up the murder scene, was doing. And that crybaby mother. Yu Qianqiu grinned, and a hint of anticipation appeared on his face. He unsheathed his long sword and left with him. In a small forest outside Swallow City, Yu Qianqiu took a look at the surroundings. It seemed like this was the place where he had opened his eyes back then. He slowly walked out, and walked toward the ancient city gate where people and carriages came and went. It was very familiar, and not much had changed. It was still the same. It was rare for him to come out, and now that he could use the kinesis flight technique, transportation was much more convenient. This time he wanted to go home to take a look. Walking on the streets of Swallow City, there were all kinds of shops and it was a bustling scene. Yu Qianqiu sighed with emotion as he relived this familiar scene. Suddenly, he realized that many people were looking at him with strange gazes. He thought to himself, "It's impossible that they know me. I left home at the age of 16, and it's been almost 10 years since then. My appearance has changed a lot." Thinking about it, he felt relieved. It was probably because he was carrying a sword on his back and carrying a bag on his waist that looked a little weird. If he had known earlier, he would have kept it first. He came to a stop in front of a rich and powerful mansion. The plaque on the door read "Yu Manor" in gold. He had finally arrived home. Looking at the bright and clean appearance of the house, it was obvious that there were no signs of decline. It was easy to imagine that the family head here had taken good care of the whole house. Climbing up the steps, just as he was about to enter, he saw the servant guarding the door walk out and block him with hostility. He shouted, "Where did you come from, evil person?" Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He was actually blocked by a servant when he entered his own house. His gaze followed the servant's gaze and landed on the hilt of the sword on his back. F***ck. A person carrying a sword is an evil person? Isn't this servant's foresight a little too bad? What's wrong with father? Why did he choose such a person to guard the door? Damn it, you even dare to block the eldest young master's way. I'll fire you later. Just as he was about to lose his temper, he remembered that this was his own house. He couldn't help but shake his head and smile. I didn't think that after leaving home for almost 10 years, I wouldn't even be able to enter the house. Who are you? I remember that Uncle Fu used to be the gatekeeper. Hearing him say this, the servant was stunned as well. He looked him up and down, and only then did he realize that there was some resemblance between his brows and the old master's. Bewildered, he asked, You're the eldest young master?" "I am." Yu Qianqiu nodded and smiled. He then asked, "Who are you? I haven't seen you before." I. Only now did the servant realize that he had provoked the eldest young master. He stuttered for a while before bowing and saying, "Uncle Fu is my father, this little one is Fu Qing." Saying this, he quickly opened the door and said, "Eldest young master, please come in." As soon as he finished speaking, Fu Qing ran into the mansion while shouting, "Eldest young master is back, eldest young master is back." Yu Qianqiu was stunned. Damn it! Why did he have to be so ostentatious? Then he shook his head with a bitter smile and walked in. The result of Fu Qing's loud shout was that the richest mansion in Swallow City immediately boiled over. Yu Qianqiu walked through the porch and came to the courtyard. He saw a group of people coming out of the main hall. He could vaguely recognize some of them as relatives of his family. The man and woman standing at the front were none other than his father and mother. Yu Qianqiu was a little excited. He strode forward and knelt down in front of the two. He kowtowed 3 times and said, "Son Yu Qianqiu greets father and mother." Chapter 141. 2 pairs of hands helped him up. It was his parents. The family of 3 looked at each other. Yu Chonggui, whose sideburns already had some gray hair, held his arm and patted his shoulder saying, "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." Shui Ernyang threw herself into his arms and started crying. She wailed, "It's all your father's fault. My son has been gone for so many years." Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and awkwardly looked at his father, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He then pushed Shui Ernyang away and said, "Mother, don't cry. I'm back now." Yu Chonggui's eyes were a little red. He pulled his wife away from his son and said, "What are you doing? Why are you crying as soon as your son is back? Aren't you purposely making your son worry?" Shui Ernyang struggled free and pulled Yu Qianqiu. She cried, "Chor, it's good that you're back. You have to save your younger brother. You have to save your younger brother." The crying stopped abruptly. Shui Ernyang was so sad that she fainted. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He quickly held his mother and carried her. He walked towards his parents' room with familiarity. The group of people followed behind him. When they reached his parents' room, he placed his mother on the bed. He grabbed his mother's hands and infused 2 streams of vital energy into his mother's body, quickly dispersing the pent-up air in her chest. Shui Ernyang slowly woke up. When she saw Yu Qianqiu, she started crying again. She was already crying like this. If she cried any more, she would hurt her spirit. Yu Qianqiu immediately placed a finger on his mother's forehead. Shui Ernyang immediately fell asleep. Yu Qianqiu heaved a sigh of relief and shouted, "Someone!" A young maidservant looked at the silent old master and trembled as she walked to Yu Qianqiu's side and said timidly, "Eldest young master." Yu Qianqiu took out an origin qi pill and handed it to her. "When madam wakes up, dissolve this pill in a bowl of warm water and feed it to madam. Don't forget." The maid quickly complied. Yu Changgui had been doing business for so many years. At this time, his attention had always been on his son. He saw that his son was nimble in ordering people around. His expression and behavior vaguely had the aura of a superior. He also had a few methods to treat his wife. Obviously, he had lived a good life outside. When he left, he was only 16 years old. Now his bearing was steady and his face resolute. The immaturity of the past had faded, and he was already an adult. "Is your mother okay?" "I'm fine. I'm just a little sad. I'll be fine after taking some medicine." Yu Qianqiu stood up and turned around. He stared at his father and frowned. "Father, did I hear wrongly? Mother seemed to have asked me to save my younger brother. What's going on?" He didn't know that in the 2nd year after he left, after giving birth to her first child, Shui Ernyang, who had been infertile for many years, actually gave birth to a younger brother. Yu Changgui sighed. His eldest son left, but God gave him a younger son. It could be said that it was God's will. But this matter of the clam-forming pearls was really a little difficult to talk about in front of his son. "Father, what's wrong? Is there something inconvenient to tell your son?" Yu Qianqiu was a little unhappy. Yu Changgui shook his head and smiled bitterly. He slowly explained the cause of the matter. "In the 2nd year after you left, your mother gave birth to a younger brother. His name is Wuxia. He is now 8 years old. But a few days ago, your younger brother suddenly disappeared. Yesterday, someone sent a letter saying that your younger brother had been kidnapped by them. They wanted us to prepare 10,000 taels of gold and come to collect it today." Yu Qianqiu nodded his head in acknowledgement. He indeed didn't expect to have a younger brother, but the two of them had been married for a long time. When he left, they weren't even 40 years old. It wasn't strange for them to have another child. But what was wrong with the Yu clan's descendants? The eldest was kidnapped once, and now the second was kidnapped again. Were the Yu clan's descendants so easy to kidnap? Who knew if there would be more thieves? It seems like the Yu clan's wealth is something that people are jealous of. Mother's maiden family has no one left. I wonder if our Yu clan's relatives, hee. It's really hard to say. I believe father isn't a foolish person, and should have some idea. Yu Qianqiu sneered. Just now, he seemed to have seen a large group of Yu clan's relatives. When they saw him, some of them had strange expressions. Yu Changgui said in a gloomy tone, "I already had my suspicions. Some people probably think that I only know how to do business and not kill people. I know you're not a good person. Otherwise your business wouldn't be so big." Yu Qianqiu smirked and asked, "Did the kidnappers report their names?" "No." Yu Changgui shook his head and said, "They said that they will send someone to check on the ransom today and tell them the location of the transaction. When the time comes, they will hand over the kidnappers." As he spoke, he suddenly stared at his son and asked, "Qianqiu, you've been cultivating for so many years. Have you learned any immortal techniques?" "I didn't cultivate. That's what soul formation cultivators do. We're just cultivators." Yu Qianqiu smiled. There was no need to tell such words to his father. Of course, he knew what his father was thinking, and it was none other than him trying to utilize some immortal techniques to rescue Chen Hao. He didn't answer directly and said, "Father, don't worry. As long as my brother is fine, I guarantee that you won't have to pay a single cent, and my brother will come back safely." Yu Changgui nodded happily. The father and son chatted as they walked out of the bedroom. When they came to the courtyard outside, there was a large group of clan members and servants standing there. Seeing the father and son come out, an old man in the middle who seemed to be the oldest asked, "Changui, how is second mother? Do you need to call a doctor?" Yu Changui bowed and said, "Thank you for asking, clan leader. Second mother is just a little sad. She will be fine after a good sleep. Qianqiu, come and greet clan leader." Yu Qianqiu didn't have a good impression of this group of clan members. In his memory, his father lost his parents and was extremely poor. None of the clan members helped him. Later on, his father received help from his mother's family and relied on his own hard work to have such a large business today. As a result, this group of clan members flocked to him like ducks after hearing the news. They were really powerful. However, the Chinese had a strong sense of clan. Yu Qianqiu didn't want his father to be embarrassed, so he walked over and bowed. Yu Qianqiu greets clan leader. The clan leader nodded and said, "I heard that you went out to learn martial arts in the past. I wonder what martial arts you learned? Have you returned after completing your martial arts? Look at the sword on your back. Did you learn some martial arts?" Yu Qianqiu knew that his parents didn't spread the news of his cultivation. He smiled indifferently and said, "I didn't learn anything practical. I just went out for a walk. I happened to know that some cowardly scoundrels wanted to harm my family, so I specially bought this sword to deter them." The clan leader stroked his long beard and said, "Very good." He didn't say anything else. However, a middle-aged man beside him walked to Yu Changgui's side and said darkly, "Brother Changgui, I've seen eldest brother's son in the past. Why does he look nothing like him now? Your family is rich, so you have to be careful." What he meant was to tell Yu Changgui that his youngest son had just been kidnapped. His eldest son, whom he hadn't heard from for many years, was here. Furthermore, there was a difference in his appearance. Be careful that someone had designs on your family's wealth. "Brother, don't worry. He's definitely my eldest son," Yu Changgui replied in a deep voice. In her heart, she was a little unhappy. How could her own son not know? Not to mention anything else, just based on the fact that her son could say, "Mother's maiden family has no one left. I don't know, are you family's ancestral relatives?" These words were known to the heavens, the earth, you and I, and only the person involved could understand the profound meaning behind it. It was clear that this was undoubtedly her eldest son. Moreover, as a father, how could he not know the minute details of his son's appearance? "Father, who is this elder?" Yu Qianqiu looked at that person with interest and asked. Chapter 142. Qianqiu, don't be rude. This is the patriarch's eldest son, Yu Zhangping. In terms of seniority, he is your uncle. Yu Changgui reprimanded. "Oh, so it's uncle." Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, "Qianqiu greets uncle. I hope uncle doesn't blame nephew for being rude. However, nephew deeply agrees with uncle's words. There must be someone coveting my family's wealth. Nephew firmly believes that there must be a mole in the Yu family, colluding with those villains outside. Otherwise, my younger brother wouldn't have been captured so easily with a few strong subordinates. Uncle, don't you think so?" He seemed to be extremely respectful on the surface, yet anyone could discern the targeted intent in his tone. It was as if Yu Zhangping was the mole, and it caused the expressions of the surrounding people to become extremely strange. Yu Zhangping's face twitched as he sternly said, "What do you mean by that?" Yu Qianqiu glanced at his father and saw that he had actually turned his head to the side as if he didn't hear anything. This further confirmed his guess and he couldn't help but laugh. "Ha ha. Uncle, don't misunderstand. It's nothing. I just want to tell everyone as the Yu family's eldest son that since I'm back, anyone who dares to stretch their claws into my family must be prepared to be beheaded. Even if it's the heavenly emperor, ha ha. I won't let a single one of them go." At the end of his words, the chill in his voice was unmistakable. Yu Zhangping still wanted to say something but was stopped by his father, the Yu family's patriarch. He only heard him say with a smile, "Eldest brother is right. If it's really a family thief, we can't let a single one of them go." Yu Qianqiu smiled and saluted him. Patriarch is indeed worthy of being the patriarch, Truly wise. Master, master. Fu Qing hurriedly walked over and said, "There are 3 people outside barging in. They say they are second young master's ticket holders." Hearing this, the members of the Yu clan immediately started whispering to each other. Everyone knew that the so-called owner of the ticket was naturally the kidnapper. To actually dare to barge into the Yu clan in broad daylight, his guts were truly too great. Yu Changgui's expression changed, and he hurriedly walked towards the courtyard. Yu Qianqiu shook his head slightly. His father was anxious to save his son, and had lost his usual calmness. Thereupon the group of people followed him. In the main hall courtyard, 3 burly men saw a group of people coming, but they still stood there with their heads held high. Sure enough, they had the style of kidnappers who wanted money more than their lives. Yu Changgui calmed himself down, walked over and cupped his fists. "I am Yu Changgui, may I know which mountain the 3 heroes are from?" A rough-looking man on the left cupped his fists and said, "Well said." Seeing that Lord Yu is a man who understands the rules, I won't waste any more time. As he spoke, he pointed at the middle-aged man with a gloomy expression and said, "This is our octagonal stronghold's second leader Wang. Today he's here to compete with Elder Yu's faction. Gong against Gong, we'll be counting the tickets face to face." The so-called counting tickets was to let the victim confirm whether the kidnapper was his man or not. Then, the kidnapper would confirm whether the victim was sincere in redeeming the ticket. If there was no sincerity, then the hostage might be killed. Yu Qianqiu slightly narrowed his eyes. Octagonal stronghold again. This daddy almost forgot to settle the score with you guys. Today you guys came to remind me. Very good. Second leader Wang. Yu Changgui cupped his fists. The second leader Wang in the middle did not say a word, and only nodded to the man on the right. That man took out a jade pendant from his bosom, and handed it to Yu Changgui. When the latter saw the jade pendant, his body swayed and he almost lost his footing. Obviously it was his son's possession. The man on the left chuckled and said, "If Lord Yu has verified it, please bring us to see if the 10,000 taels of gold has been prepared." Yu Qianqiu coldly snorted and unhurriedly walked over and said, "A bunch of reckless fools. 10,000 taels of gold, and they still dare to ask for it." As he spoke, he supported his father and walked straight back and said, "Fu Qing, find a chair for master to sit down and rest." The Yu family's group of relatives were somewhat stunned, but since it was none of their business, no one said anything. In the crowd, Yu Zhongping's face flashed with a trace of a sneer. His condescending look immediately angered the 2 bandits. They immediately reached for the sabers on their waists, wanting to teach Yu Qianqiu a lesson. However, the second leader Wang quickly held them down. When he saw Yu Qianqiu carrying a long sword on his back and a bag on his waist, his pupils fiercely contracted. Fu Qing brought over a chair as instructed. Yu Qianqiu helped his father sit down and said softly, "Father, don't worry for the time being. Leave this matter to me to handle." Yu Changgui grabbed his wrist. Yu Qianqiu lightly pushed him away and shook his head, indicating that he didn't need to worry. He turned back to stare at the 3 bandits and coldly said, 10,000 taels of gold. What can you do if I don't give it to you?" As soon as these words came out, the Yu family's relatives immediately whispered to each other. Wasn't this forcing the kidnappers to kill the hostages? The 2 bandits who were about to pull out their sabers immediately pulled out their sabers again. Second leader Wang once again held them down and took a deep breath. He didn't dare to be sure before, but now that he heard the other party say such words, he was almost convinced. Second leader Wang took a few steps forward and bowed to Yu Qianqiu. He said in a respectful tone, "Senior is an expert in the cultivation world. It was our fault for offending Senior today. We also don't dare to ask Senior for the 10,000 taels of gold. We will definitely return the people we kidnapped safely. We won't dare to be careless. Please let us go, Senior." The 2 bandits were immediately stunned. The usually arrogant second leader would actually say such humble words. They wouldn't believe it even if they were beaten to death. The Yu family's relatives were also dumbfounded. How did the kidnappers suddenly apologize? Among the crowd, Yu Changping had an angry expression. Yu Qianqiu sneered and said, "I didn't expect you to be so perceptive. You actually know about the cultivation world. I can let you go, but you have to answer a question first. If I am satisfied with your answer, I will let you go. Otherwise, if you make me unhappy, I will definitely raise your Octagon village to the ground." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. The Octagon village was a place that even the government couldn't raise to the ground. Yu Qianqiu's words were too arrogant. However, what did they mean by the cultivation world? Everyone was confused. Yu Changgui, who was sitting on a chair, once again sized up his son's proud back. "Senior, please ask." Second leader Wang bowed respectfully. "Tell me who the Yu family is colluding with. Don't tell me you didn't, or the consequences will be very serious." Yu Qianqiu said lightly. Yu Changping, who was in the crowd, trembled. He looked at his father, the clan leader. This second leader Wang had a difficult expression on his face. The rough-looking subordinate behind him walked out, cupped his fists and said casually, "Young senior, you don't have to make things difficult for our second leader. We can't talk about this. We have our own rules. If we tell you who the client is, then how will our Octagon village be able to maintain its reputation in the future? How will we be able to continue living in the underworld?" Before he could finish his words, they heard the sound of a sword ring. Everyone saw a flash of light in front of them, and then the bandit lost his voice on the spot. His head was tossed high into the air, separated from his shoulders. Warm blood spurted from the severed head, and when the blood ran dry, his body swayed and fell to the ground. That light transformed into a flying sword and circled around Yu Qianqiu a few times before returning to its scabbard. "Murder!" Everyone cried out in shock. Yu Qianqiu turned around and glanced at them. He said coldly, "If you want to die, then scream as loud as you can." Just this sentence alone caused everyone to fall silent. They had just witnessed the flying sword kill someone. Who would dare to go against his words? A certain father and son were shivering in fear. "Brother!" The remaining two bandits cried out in grief. One of them hugged the dead body while second leader Wang hugged his head. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and shouted angrily, "There are rules in the cultivation world. We are not allowed to meddle in worldly affairs. Why did you kill us mortals?" Yu Qianqiu sneered. "Humph, you seem to know quite a lot. How strange. You kidnapped my younger brother, and now you're trying to reason with me? What kind of logic is that? Forget it. I won't be able to get anything out of you. I believe you have a first leader, right? I'd better go to the Octagon village myself." As soon as he finished speaking, nearly 100 cold glints shot out from the storage pouch. 2 mournful screams rang out, then stopped abruptly. The cold glints disappeared into the red, and the thick smell of blood spread out along with a bloody mist. The Yu clan's relatives and servants had never seen murder like this. Those who were braver had only seen beheadings at the entrance of the food market. They couldn't bear to watch any longer, and turned their heads away to retch. Chapter 143. The cold light receded and the blood mist gradually dissipated. The 3 bandits had turned into a pool of blood on the ground. Looking at Yu Qianqiu, who was standing with his hands behind his back, everyone shuddered. This was clearly a murderous demon. The thick smell of blood left a deep mark in everyone's heart. "Fuqing!" Yu Qianqiu called out. The person who was called let out an "ah" and moved over with trembling legs. His chin trembled as he said, Eldest young master." Yu Qianqiu glanced at him and frowned. He shouted, "What are you afraid of? How can you guard the door of my Yu clan with this kind of behavior? Stand properly." Yes, eldest young master." Fuqing tried his best to suppress his trembling body. "Arrange for people to surround this place. Without my permission, none of the Yu clan's relatives are allowed to leave." As he spoke, a sword appeared in Yu Qianqiu's hand and he handed it to him. He said, "Hold this well. If anyone dares to barge in, kill them with this sword." Seeing him holding the sword in a daze, Yu Qianqiu shouted again, "If anyone dares to barge in, kill them without mercy. If you dare to let even one person go, I will take your head. Do you understand?" Understood. Fuqing hurriedly nodded his head. All the relatives looked at each other in dismay, but no one dared to object. The patriarch and his sons' faces were ashen. Yu Qianqiu faced his father and bowed. He said, "Father, please wait a moment. I will go to the Octagon village to bring my brother back. It won't be long before the truth is revealed." Yu Changgui nodded and said, "Go. Come back quickly. Don't let the relatives wait too long." "Yes, father." Yu Qianqiu bowed respectfully. The long sword behind him shot out with a chong sound and carried him away like a ray of light. Instantly, everyone in the courtyard was dumbfounded. That leisurely flying celestial being was fortunately seen by a group of ordinary people. Someone immediately exclaimed, "Heavens! Big Brother is a sword immortal." "Sword immortal!" All the relatives whispered to each other. Yu Changgui was so excited that he was trembling slightly. He had told his son to go and come back quickly, but he didn't expect that he would use such a shocking method. Did he say something wrong? Say, why did he say go and return quickly? One must know that a sword immortal would never show his true appearance in front of mortals. AI. My son is no longer an ordinary person. I was too abrupt. Fu Qing looked at the sword in his hand with a face full of surprise. Today, he was fortunate enough to be bestowed a sword by a sword immortal. This was a blessing that he had cultivated for 8 lifetimes. He held the sword with both hands and walked over to Yu Zhanggui. He asked respectfully, "Master, what should this lowly one do?" Yu Zhanggui stared at the sword in his hand and couldn't help but reach out to take it. He turned it over and over in his hand and examined it, causing the other clan members to look at it with envy. Yu Changgui stood up from his chair and pulled out the sword. The sword was blue like autumn water. Under the sunlight, the sharp blade glowed with envy. Yu Zhanggui stood up from his chair and pulled out his sword with a schwa sound. The blade of the sword was as clear as autumn water. Under the sunlight, the sharp edge of the sword was glowing. Good sword. It's really a good sword. All the relatives kept praising it. In fact, they couldn't tell if it was a good sword or not. They mainly thought that it was something from a sword immortal. How could it be bad? In addition, the sword looked so beautiful, so they naturally concluded that it was a good sword. This sword was personally refined by Yu Qianqiu, and there were many more in Utopia. As he could only control 100 flying swords, these were all in stock. However, compared to the treasured swords of the mortal world, this flying sword of the Dharma artifact level was incomparable in terms of workmanship and material. Yu Changgui put the sword back into its scabbard and handed it to Fu Qing. "This isn't an ordinary sword. It's the eldest young master's flying sword. Since the eldest young master has already given you the authority, just do as he says. You can mobilize all the servants in the residence. Go." The moment he said this, all the servants looked at Fu Qing with envy. Some of the unmarried maids looked at Fu Qing with splendor in their eyes. Yes, Fu Qing retreated. He never thought that a servant guarding the door would have such great authority. This thing was not inferior to an imperial sword. Thinking of the eldest young master's words, he didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly mobilized people and surrounded all the relatives. Yu Qianqiu still had some impression of the Octagon village's location. After leaving the Yu residence, it only took him a few moments to find the Octagon village's hideout in a mountainous area that was 100 miles away. He landed on the sword and immediately caused a commotion in the hideout. Yu Qianqiu sized up the village. It was built on the basis of danger. It was indeed a good place that was easy to defend and hard to attack. It was no wonder that even the authorities couldn't take it down. He squinted his eyes and stared at the signboard at the main entrance of the stronghold. On it were the words Jui Hall. He snorted in his heart. It seemed like robbers liked to use this gimmick. At this moment, a group of people came out of the hall. All of them were holding shining swords and spears. Needless to say, the burly man in the middle was the leader of the bandit hideout. The man was stunned when he saw Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu was also stunned when he saw him. The burly man was wearing the same clothes as him. It was the standard clothes of the supporting Immortal Island. After a closer look, he was astonishingly at the 10th level of the Qi refinement realm. The man excitedly strode over and kowtowed. He said, "Luli greet Senior. Senior has come here, but the sect wants." He was so excited that he couldn't continue speaking. The group of bandits behind him were also dumbfounded. Yu Qianqiu was stunned again. He immediately understood everything. So this guy was also an unlucky person who was chased out of the supporting Immortal Island. No wonder the second leader knew a little about the cultivation world. Looking at this guy's expression, he probably thought that the supporting Immortal Island wanted to call him back. Wishful thinking. I was wondering who was causing trouble here. So it was the abandoned disciple of the supporting Immortal Island. You actually dared to wear the clothes of the supporting Immortal Island. You really don't want to live. Yu Qianqiu snorted. The man kowtowed again. Senior, please forgive me. After I left the supporting Immortal Island, I really didn't know how to survive. I could only bring a group of people to become bandits. Yu Qianqiu thought about it. A disciple who wasn't even at the foundation establishment stage couldn't even be compared to a martial arts expert. Moreover, most of them had lost contact with the outside world since they were young. They knew nothing about survival. Ling Feng and the others were also at a loss when they were just chased out. Like Guan Yu, he ended up pretending to be a Taoist in a Taoist temple to swindle people. Thinking about this, his anger dissipated a lot. He said in a deep voice, "You are Luli, right? Get up. I'm not here to catch up with you. Where is the kidnapped kid in the Yu residence?" Luli quickly got up and pointed to the horse pen. "That kid is locked up there. You didn't do anything to him, right?" Yu Qianqiu glanced at him coldly. No, not even a strand of hair is missing." Luli wasn't an idiot. He could tell that this kid was related to the people from the supporting Immortal Island. In his heart, he cursed the employer's ancestors, but he didn't know that he was also cursing Yu Qianqiu's ancestors. Yu Qianqiu slowly walked into the horse pen. Instantly, a rage burned in his chest. A kid whose face could be vaguely seen was about 8 or 9 years old. He was glaring at the people who came in. His body was covered with grass and horse dung. He was tied up tightly and his mouth was stuffed with a dirty cloth. His cheeks were swollen, and there was a clear palm print. It was obvious that he had been slapped. This was his younger brother, Yu Wuqiu? This is what you meant by not even a strand of hair is missing. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Luli with a cold smile. He originally wanted to take him in for his own use. But now he was sentenced to death on the spot. The latter was so scared that his head was full of sweat. He stuttered and didn't know what to say. Yu Qianqiu walked to the kid's side and pulled out the rag in his mouth. A trail of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Who knew that the kid would spit out a mouthful of bloody saliva the moment he loosened his mouth? He opened his mouth and cursed, "Evil thieves, kill me if you have the guts. Otherwise, I will trample your den to the ground in the future." Yu Qianqiu, who was spat on his face, was stunned. Then he smiled bitterly and wiped his face. This brat spoke without rhyme or reason. He didn't know how to beat around the bush. If he was really a bandit, seeing him like this, I'm afraid he would really eliminate the root of the problem to prevent future troubles. He immediately flicked his finger on the kid's forehead and scolded jokingly, "Brat, what are you spitting for? I'm Yu Qianqiu." "Bastard, how dare you flick my forehead? You're Yu Qianqiu, right? Okay, I'll remember you. You're Yu Qianqiu? Why is your name the same as my big brother's?" The kid's tattered face was crooked. "Nonsense, I'm your big brother. Father sent me to save you," Yu Qianqiu said unhappily. Chapter 144. There's no proof. The kid showed a suspicious expression. "What proof do you have to prove that you are my brother?" "Bastard, you're so smart. If you were smart, how could you be tied up here?" Yu Qianqiu flicked him again, causing him to cry out in pain. He casually broke the ropes binding him, got up, stared at Luli and asked, "This was caused by Yu Zhongping's family and you, right? How did you know? Could it be that the second in command who went down the mountain told you?" Luli was shocked. Only he and the second head knew about this. He didn't tell anyone else. It was the second head who told him. It wasn't a good thing to betray one's employer. Yu Qianqiu sneered. With Yu Zhongping's character, he shows everything on his face. Do you need someone to tell you? As for your second head, I saw that he wasn't feeling well, so I sent him to reincarnate. It's him. Suddenly, the kid pointed at his swollen face and said, "It was Yu Zhongping, that bastard." He tricked us out of the city. My face is swollen because of him. Ah. You killed the second head. Then there are two other brothers? Luli was shocked. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the child and didn't say anything. He turned back to size up Luli and asked curiously, I say Luli, have you been away from supporting Immortal Island for too long? Or have water entered your brain? Do I need to report to you when I kill people? Stop talking nonsense with me. If it wasn't for the fact that we were from the same sect, your head would have been removed. Go and gather all your minions. I have something to say. Luli seemed to be drained of all his strength. He said dejectedly, yes, and walked out slowly, maybe because he was tied up for too long. Yu Wuchou's limbs were a little stiff. Yu Qianqiu looked at him and smiled. Can you still walk? Do you want me to carry you? Yu Wuchou was embarrassed into anger. Who wants you to carry me? I can walk by myself. He suddenly asked curiously. Are you really my brother? He kept looking at the stranger in front of him. Follow me if you can. Yu Qianqiu couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with him. He thought to himself, you're just a little kid, yet you're already so arrogant. This is the problem of spoiling the children of big families. If this goes on, you'll be at a disadvantage. Today, I'll teach this cheap little brother a lesson, lest he doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Dang dang dang. The urgent sound of a gong rang outside, and the entire stronghold became lively. Luli stood on a small wooden platform and looked at the hundreds of subordinates that had gathered. His face was ashen and he did not make a sound, as if he had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. However, Yu Qianqiu's strength was not something he could fight against. To put it bluntly, killing him was as easy as killing an ant. A group of subordinates stood in an orderly manner below the platform. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly in his heart. They were quite disciplined. He looked back at the little kid who was limping behind him and said, Follow me. Luli took the lead and walked to the side of the wooden platform. The little kid struggled to climb up, but before he could stand firm, Yu Qianqiu grabbed the back of his collar and lifted him up. Let go of me, I can walk. The little kid's struggle was futile. Yu Qianqiu pointed at the group of people below and said, Originally, I wanted to let them go today, but you said you wanted to flatten this place. Fine, I'll fulfill your wish today. As soon as he finished speaking, Luli knelt down and begged, Senior, please let them go. They have parents and children at the foot of the mountain. Their families depend on them to earn money. If they weren't forced to, they wouldn't have followed me up the mountain to become bandits. Once they're killed, their families won't be able to survive. Senior, please have mercy. The subordinates all looked terrified. They had all seen Yu Qianqiu descend from the sky. To them, those who could fly in the sky were like gods. Now that this god said he wanted to kill them, they immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. In an instant, the entire mountain camp was filled with begging voices. What do you mean by taking care of the elderly and children? After you die, tell those words to the people you killed. Since you've come out to make a living, you must understand that sooner or later, you'll have to pay for what you did. It's not that I won't pay, it's that the time isn't right. Yu Qianqiu slowly said in a cold voice. No. Senior, I beg you no. Luli hugged his leg and begged. Scram. Yu Qianqiu directly kicked him off the platform. Then he shook the little kid and shouted, Watch carefully. In fact, Yu Wuchou was already a little stunned. He had never seen so many people kneeling and begging. As soon as he finished speaking, nearly 100 cold lights shot out from the storage bag, crazily sweeping towards the people kneeling on the ground. In an instant, blood splattered everywhere, flesh and blood flew everywhere, and screams shook the sky. The little kid was stunned at first. When he came to his senses, his whole body trembled. He covered his eyes with his little hands, unable to watch anymore. Yu Qianqiu coldly snorted. Today he was going to kill this person for you to see. You have no choice but to watch. His thumb and index finger pinched the back of the little kid's neck, and a stream of true essence entered his body. The little kid's hands immediately drooped down, and his eyes were wide open. Witnessing the bloody, violent, and wanton killing in front of him, he could not speak, nor could he close his eyes. He could not move, and could only watch and listen. Crystal clear tears continuously flowed down his cheeks. Below the platform, Luli clenched his fists and knelt there with tears streaming down his face. He looked up to the sky and howled. But none of those wantonly killing flying swords touched him. Those who wanted to escape were immediately shredded into pieces by a few cold lights. There were also those who wanted to fight it out with Yu Qianqiu before they died. Unfortunately, they did not even have the chance to get close. Their legs were nowhere to be seen, and when they fell, they were already shredded into pieces. In just a short while apart from Luli, not a single living person could be seen below. Broken limbs were everywhere, and the blood on the ground gathered into streams that flowed towards the lower ground. The smell of blood in the air was suffocating. After killing those who needed to be killed, Yu Qianqiu's divine sense moved, and 100 cold lights swept towards the various buildings in the village with an unstoppable momentum. Crashing sounds could be heard everywhere. Not long after, smoke and dust rose everywhere. Even the erected flagpole was not spared. The cold lights retracted, and the sounds disappeared. The surroundings finally quieted down, and only Luli's sobbing could be heard below the platform. The entire Octagon village was no longer recognizable. Only the wooden platform under Yu Qianqiu's feet remained the same, standing there alone. Yu Qianqiu turned the little lad's head around and let him look around. He said, "Didn't you want to flatten this place? I've already done it for you, but what's wrong with you? Why don't you even dare to look? If you don't even dare to look, what gives you the right to say that you want to flatten this place?" Yu Qianqiu lifted him up and faced him shouting, "Crying? Why are you crying? You only have this little guts and this little bit of guts. Are you even worthy of saying such things?" As he spoke, he turned him around again, letting him witness the tragic scene around him. He spun around and shouted, "Do you see that? Originally, I did not intend to kill them, but you said you wanted to flatten this place. All right, it's flattened now. Why are you crying? Are you regretting it? Then why did you open your mouth and speak such nonsense? Let me tell you now, as a man, you must be responsible for every word you say. Everything in front of you is the result of your careless words. Look carefully at everything here." After a while, when he was almost done lecturing Luli, Yu Qianqiu bent over and picked up Luli. Then he carried the two of them and flew away on his sword. Just as he stood up, the wooden platform collapsed. The entire Octagon village was completely flattened. Chapter 145. Inside the Yu clan's courtyard, Yu Qianqiu descended from the sky with two people in his hands, his long sword returning to its scabbard. Everyone was shocked when they saw Yu Wuqiu's appearance. They didn't expect the Yu clan's young master, who usually lived a luxurious life, to end up like this, especially with the two palm prints on his face. When the patriarch and his son saw the people brought by Yu Qianqiu, their faces turned deathly pale. Yu Chonggui waved his hand to disperse the crowd, then hurriedly walked up to his son, who had a lifeless expression on his face, and asked anxiously, "Wuqiu, what happened to you?" "Father, he's fine. He was just a little frightened," Yu Qianqiu said calmly. At this moment, Yu Wuqiu was awoken by his father's familiar face. When he came back to his senses, he saw that Yu Qianqiu was like he had seen a ghost. He hurriedly hid behind Yu Chonggui, hugged his arm, and pointed at Yu Qianqiu screaming, "Father, he killed people. He really killed people. He killed so many people. So many people died." Everyone looked at Yu Qianqiu at the same time, but they clearly weren't surprised that he had killed people. Yu Chonggui looked at his eldest son puzzled and asked, "What happened?" "It's nothing. It's just a few hundred small fries from the Octagon camp. I casually took care of them. In the future, there won't be any more Octagon camp bandits in this area," Yu Qianqiu said with a calm smile. He said it lightly, but everyone's hair stood on end. A few hundred people were all killed by him in less than 4 hours. The more they thought about it, the colder they felt. When did the Yu clan have such a killer? You killed them all? Yu Chonggui frowned. Obviously, he was a little unhappy with his son's massacre. "I didn't kill them all. I left one alive." Yu Qianqiu shook his head and pointed at the man lying on the ground. He sneered and said, "This is the Octagon Stronghold's big leader, Luli. He has a close relationship with our patriarch and his son. I've already asked him, And he's already explained everything. This time, the kidnapping of my younger brother was the doing of the sanctimonious patriarch of our Yu clan, father and son. Their goal was to steal our clan's wealth. They were going to kill the hostages as soon as they got the gold, and then think of a way to get rid of my father, so that there would be no successor for our family, and then find a reason to swallow our property. The 2 handprints on his younger brother's face were personally slapped by Yu Zhangping after he tricked him out of the city. It's just that they never expected me to come back at this time. The Yu clan's relatives immediately went into an uproar. They instantly distanced themselves from the father and son. It would be best if they didn't get hurt by this killer. Yu Qianqiu sneered in his heart. Just by looking at the father and son's expression, he knew that this wasn't something that his son could do alone. This daddy doesn't have time to be long-winded with you. I'll first make up a crime for you. In any case, it's just that. If I didn't care about this old man's face, I would have killed you long ago. Yu Changgui's complexion turned ashen. He fiercely turned his head and glared at the father and son. He shouted, "Unsatisfied beasts, what else do you 2 dogs have to say?" When the patriarch and his son saw Yu Qianqiu bring Lu Li and Yu Wuqiu here, they knew that everything was over. They originally wanted to quibble, but when they saw the gloomy expression in Yu Qianqiu's eyes, they couldn't say anything. In the face of such a powerful opponent, any kind of explanation was unnecessary. Suddenly, Yu Changping rushed out of the crowd and knelt in front of Yu Changgui's feet. He repeatedly kowtowed and said, "Big brother, I was blinded by greed. Big brother, for the sake of being from the same clan, please spare me this time." As he spoke, he slapped his own mouth. Yu Changgui kicked him away and sternly shouted, "Bastard, I don't have a brother like you. Come, tie up this father and son pair, and send them to the government office together with this bandit." Several able-bodied men immediately took ropes and tied up the 3 men tightly, and then they were pushed out of the room. The Yu clan's relatives shook their heads and sighed. They didn't expect this sanctimonious father and son pair to have such wild ambitions. How many people didn't covet this family's wealth? Wait. Yu Changgui suddenly sighed and said, "Forget it, family shame shouldn't be spread in public. Just send them to the ancestral hall, and deal with them according to the clan's rules." Then he cupped his hands towards the other clan members and said, "I hope that when we carry out the clan's rules, the clan members can be witnesses." That's right. Family shame shouldn't be spread in public. Of course. Don't worry, big brother. We all saw it with our own eyes, so we must be witnesses. Everyone agreed. Yu Changgui was the clan's biggest financial backer. If they didn't do him a favor, then when would they do him a favor? In any case, they wouldn't lose anything. At this time, Yu Qianqiu suddenly stood up with a smile and bowed to everyone, saying, "Junior also has a matter to ask of all the uncles and brothers. Junior came back this time, because of my father's summons. Since this matter is over, Junior still needs to go out and cultivate. As for this matter, I hope that all the uncles and brothers can keep it a secret for Junior. Just pretend that Junior never appeared in this matter, please." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone immediately agreed, but the atmosphere from before was gone. Although they were all clan members, the crux of the matter was that this fellow was too ruthless. Killing people was like cutting vegetables, and he didn't even blink. Who knew what the consequences would be if they said the wrong thing? But from his words, everyone thought of one thing. It turned out that there was such a powerful son hiding behind Yu Changgui, and he could summon him at any time, but he had never said anything about it. How sinister! Fortunately, they hadn't offended him too much. Otherwise, if something happened, it would be a massacre. Who could resist that? Everyone shuddered at the thought of it. Yu Qianqiu smiled and thanked them. This was the effect he wanted. It wasn't easy for him to come back, so he had no choice but to use such a ruthless method. Since they had met, he had to get rid of them completely. In the future, he wouldn't place his thoughts here. A group of clan members and servants escorted the 3 people out of the Yu residence. The surroundings instantly became much quieter. Yu Wuqiu hid behind his father, craning his neck to secretly size up this elder brother of his. This elder brother was really a little too scary. Yu Qianqiu smiled at him. He had thought that Yu Wuchou had been frightened, and he had to adjust his emotions a little to prevent it from leaving a shadow in his heart. Now, it seemed that this brat was born with courage, and there was no need to worry. What you said just now was all true? Yu Changgui looked at him and frowned. Yu Qianqiu was stunned, and he asked in surprise, "What was true? You said that you still had to go out to cultivate. Didn't you come back with success this time?" Yu Changgui asked. Yu Wuchou, who was behind him, suddenly shook him and asked, "Father, is he really my elder brother Yu Qianqiu?" Yu Changgui lowered his head and shouted, "Bastard, if he isn't your elder brother, who else could he be?" Yu Wuchou pointed at Yu Qianqiu and said embarrassedly, "But he killed a lot of people. Father, he really killed a lot of people. Hundreds of people were all killed by him." "Ignorant!" Yu Changgui shouted. "If your elder brother didn't want to save you, would he have killed so many people?" When he remembered that the Octagon village had kidnapped both of his sons, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. He thought that it was good to kill them. If they didn't kill them, who knew when they would kidnap his grandson again? Yu Qianqiu smiled and suddenly reached out to Fu Qing, who was standing not far away. The sword that Fu Qing was holding flew into his hand, causing the latter to panic. Yu Qianqiu handed the sword to his brother and said with a smile, "Take it." Chapter 146. When Yu Wuchou saw that the sword could fly by itself, his eyes were already full of stars. When he saw his big brother telling him to hold it, he greedily looked at it and looked up at his father. Seeing his father nod his head, he shyly reached out to take it and held it tightly in his arms. He looked at his big brother and finally had a good impression of him. He still had the mind of a child. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "Wuchou, can you write now?" Yu Wuchou nodded his head and said, "I could write when I was 4. Not bad." Yu Qianqiu turned his head and shouted to Fucking, "Bring a short table over and prepare a brush, ink and paper." Fucking hurriedly went to prepare. Yu Changgui looked at his 2 sons and didn't know what they were going to do. After a while, all the tools were set up. Yu Qianqiu pointed to the table and smiled at his brother. "Wuchou, big brother has something to say to you. I will speak and you write. Write down everything I say. I want to test if you can really write." Hearing him say this, Yu Wuchou's childish eagerness to win was aroused. He walked over and put the sword on the table. He grabbed the writing brush and dipped it in the ink. He stared at his brother with big eyes, waiting for him to speak. Yu Qianqiu thought for a while and walked over to his side and said with a smile, "I am the eldest son of the family. I should be filial to my parents and share my father's worries. But I am young and frivolous. I want to pursue the great way, but the great way is vague. This road is full of ups and downs, but I must pursue it. I dare not be distracted, and I am ashamed to face my parents. Today, I will take up the brush and entrust a heavy task to me." At this point, Yu Wuchou knew what he meant and looked back at his big brother in shock. Yu Changgui's eyebrows knitted together. Yu Qianqiu pursed his lips and signaled his brother to continue writing. He sighed and said, "From today onwards, big brother's heavy responsibility will be entrusted to me. Brother must remember that when we were in the bandits' lair, big brother used the blood of hundreds of bandits to teach you. You must know that only by enduring the hardships of hardships can one rise above others. One must not indulge in riches and honor. One must guard against arrogance and rashness. One must be filial to one's parents. One must inherit the family business. And one must carry forward the family's name. Brother, I hope you will remember this great trust." After he finished speaking, he also finished writing. Although his handwriting wasn't very good, the meaning of the words was simple and clear. Yu Wuchou was still a little confused about the great Tao in front of him. He only knew that his brother was going out to do something big, and everything in the family was going to be entrusted to him. Looking at the words on the paper, he pouted for a long time before reluctantly saying, "I will remember big brother's words." It's good that you've remembered it. Keep what you've written well. If I come back one day and find that you've failed to do it, you're still acting like a thief in a den of thieves. You don't have any real ability, but you're still spouting nonsense. Just wait and see how I'll deal with you then." Yu Qianqiu laughed. Yu Wuchou pouted higher and higher. Yu Changgui, on the other hand, was distressed. Originally, when he saw that his eldest son had returned, he thought that someone was going to inherit the family business. The tradition of the Wuxia Empire was that the eldest son would inherit the family business. Now that the eldest son had borrowed his second son's pen to express his intentions clearly, it was equivalent to indirectly answering the previous question. The path that he had walked on must be incomparably difficult, and he was afraid that it would be difficult to turn back. That's why he did this. He had put in a lot of effort. Yu Changgui couldn't say anything more. Now that his son's real situation was in front of him, he was no longer an ordinary person and couldn't force him to stay. He could only regret why he agreed to his son's request back then. He sighed and said, "Fu Qing, put up the second young master's calligraphy and hang it in his room." Yes. Fu Qing respectfully accepted the order. Speaking of which, Fu Qing was really happy today. Master and young master would always look for him whenever something happened. His future was probably going to change. "When are we leaving?" Yu Changgui sighed. Yu Qianqiu was startled. He originally wanted to leave right away, but thinking that it was too much. He hadn't returned for almost 10 years. What's the matter if he delayed for a day? He smiled and replied, "Then let's stay one more night." Yu Changgui understood the meaning behind his words. He waved his hand and called for the servants to prepare a banquet. The father and son trio walked toward Shue'ernyang. Yu Wuchou hugged the sword happily. Just as he reached the door, he saw Shue'ernyang coming out. When the latter saw her youngest son, she immediately hugged him and burst into tears. Yu Qianqiu had a toothache when he heard this. They hadn't seen each other for almost 10 years, but his mother still loved to cry. Both he and his father turned their heads to the side. "Ah, how did my son become like this?" "Ah, who slapped him on his face?" Shue'ernyang asked anxiously. Yu Changgui's face twitched. He turned his head and said, "I say, are you done yet? Such a small injury will be fine in 2 days. Can't you see boss is here? Why are you crying all the time?" "Ah." Shue'ernyang stood up. When she saw Yu Qianqiu, she threw herself at him and cried, "Where did my son go for so many years? Don't tell me you don't even want your mother anymore." "Woo-woo." Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth and pushed her away. He smiled bitterly. "Mother, your son hasn't eaten for a long time. My stomach is really hungry." "Ah. Then why didn't you say so earlier?" Shue'ernyang wiped away her tears and said, "You wait, I will personally get it for you." She then led the servant girl away. Phew. The father and son let out a breath and looked at each other. Xiao Wuchou shook his head and sighed. "I really can't stand mother like this. I would rather stay in the thieves' den for a few more days." "Bastard! What did you say?" Yu Changgui shouted. The little fellow stuck out his tongue and quickly changed the topic. "Big brother, I am too dirty. I will go take a bath first. Otherwise, I won't be able to attend the banquet later." He then ran away. Soon, the family of 4 sat at the sumptuous dinner table. With his mother's persuasion, Yu Qianqiu ate until he was full. Although it was a little uncomfortable, he enjoyed the warm feeling. That night, in Yu Changgui's study room, the father and son had a deep conversation. Yu Qianqiu gave them 3 sealed porcelain bottles as an explanation. After that, Yu Qianqiu asked someone to invite his mother over. In front of the 2 elders, he took out 2 rui elixirs that were shining with rainbow light and handed them to them. The couple looked at the beads in their hands with their mouths agape. After a long time, Yu Changgui was moved and said, "Is this an immortal elixir?" Yu Qianqiu smiled indifferently and said, "More or less. Father, mother, just take it. This elixir has the effect of preserving one's appearance for a long time. It can also detoxify and nourish one's appearance. After taking it, one will be immune to all kinds of poison. However, there are some side effects after taking it. You have to be prepared beside the toilet bowl and bathtub." Hearing the benefits, the couple directly filtered out the side effects. Yu Changgui solemnly swallowed the rainbow light into his mouth. However, he was not used to this quail egg-sized thing, so it took a lot of effort to swallow it down his throat. Shue'ernyang was about to swallow it, but she stopped and said, "I think I don't need it. Leave it for your brother." Have you used it before, my son? Yu Qianqiu sighed in his heart. All mothers in the world were great. He smiled and said, My brother is still young. Do you want him to stay like this for the rest of his life? I will take care of his matters. Mother, you don't have to worry too much. As for the elixir, I have already used it. You can take it with ease. Only then did Shui'ernyang feel at ease and swallow it. After coming out, he did not sleep in his original room that night. Instead, he slept with his brother. He told the boy many things, but he did not know if he could remember them. The next morning, the family could no longer find him. Only then did they realize that Yu Qianqiu had left quietly. Yu Changgui stood in the garden with his son, who was holding a sword. The former let out a long sigh. Chapter 147. Yu Qianqiu originally wanted to spend the night peacefully before leaving. After lying in bed with his brother and chatting for a while, the little fellow fell asleep in a daze, perhaps because he was too tired. Looking at the sleeping little fellow, Yu Qianqiu felt emotional. He considered if he should help the little fellow to a position that ordinary people couldn't reach. After some thought, he gave up. This family didn't have many people to begin with, and he was leaving. Furthermore, no one knew what the future held for them. Sometimes there were some things that he wasn't confident in. If he wasn't careful, he might bring disaster to the family. It was best to let the family live peacefully. He tried his best not to let them get involved in those illusory matters. He could do whatever he wanted alone. Having a family to feed them would only be a burden to both of them. It was too dangerous. Unable to sleep late at night, Yu Qianqiu decided to leave when he thought of how his mother would definitely be crying when they parted the next day. Although he said that he was leaving, he had actually returned to Utopia in an instant. Now, any place was extremely close to him, but it was also extremely far away. It was also late at night in Utopia. However, Ethereal Palace on Ethereal Peak was like a starry sky. It was extremely charming under the embellishment of fluorite. The messy names of Ethereal Peak and Ethereal Palace were all given by Yu Qianqiu. The main reason was that he couldn't think of any good names, so he used them as if he had heard them somewhere before. As soon as Yu Qianqiu appeared in Misty Palace, he heard a familiar horn sound from afar. He turned his head to look and murmured, "Emergency assembly signal. Is Yunchang training for night raids again? Let's take a look." There was a field in the middle of a row of wooden and stone houses that took up an area of nearly 1,000 meters. At that moment, the field was surrounded by flames. A group of people rushed out of the houses and lined up neatly in 3 groups. Yu Qianqiu quietly appeared on top of a building to observe. The people in front of him were the original 400 disciples from the various sections. After eliminating the female disciples, there were 309 people left. Thus, under Yu Qianqiu's suggestion, Guan Yu divided them into 3 companies. Each company had 103 people, with a company commander. Each company was further divided into 3 platoons, each platoon consisting of 34 people. Each platoon had a platoon leader. Each platoon was divided into 3 classes, and each class had 11 people. Each class had a squad leader. The 3 company commanders were 3 late nascent soul cultivators, and the platoon leaders and squad leaders were also nascent soul cultivators. At the same cultivation level, these positions were usually taken by cultivators who were good at commanding. Guan Yu immediately discovered that the efficiency of training had greatly increased after the division management. In front of the field, a large black triangular flag was hung on a flagpole. If one were to look at it carefully under the light of the flames, they could vaguely see 2 large golden characters embroidered on it. Hero. Next to the flagpole, on a stone platform, Guan Yu was dressed in black, with a black scarf wrapped around his head. He swept his cold gaze across the field with an extraordinary bearing, nodding his head in satisfaction. Suddenly, he shouted in a deep voice, "Company commander, come up to the stage to receive the battle plan." He then took out 3 jade archives. The 3 men standing in front of the 3 teams rushed up to the stone platform. They each received a jade archive from Guan Yu and immediately scanned it with their divine sense. Once they were done, they returned the jade archives and dashed to the front of their respective teams. The three of them shouted to the members of their respective teams, "Dress according to the requirements of Battle Plan Number 3. Carry the appropriate weapons. You are required to assemble within 5 minutes. Dismissed." Whoosh. In an instant, all three teams rushed back to their rooms. Not long after, one by one, they rushed out dressed in black, with black scarves wrapped around their heads. After they were in position, the company commanders gathered their platoon commanders and squad leaders and quickly passed down the battle plan. Finally, one by one, the company commanders reported to Guan Yu. "Reporting. First company is ready. Reporting. Second company is ready. Reporting. Third company is ready." Guan Yu nodded and shouted, "Order." Once the target has entered the encirclement, the first round of attack will be concentrated by all three companies. We must inflict the greatest amount of damage to the target. Once we achieve the desired effect, immediately move on to the second round of attack. First company and third company will be the main attackers, while second company will support them. Also, seize the spoils of war as fast as possible, considering that the target may have a large number of reinforcements. Once this situation is discovered, third company will immediately switch from the main attack to a defensive position. If the defensive position is not ideal, first company and second company will quickly return to support. Gather the greatest fighting strength possible and retreat quickly. If the situation becomes extremely dire, first company and second company will retreat, while third company will cover the rear. Understood? Understood. The shouts shook the heavens. With a wave of Guan Yu's hand, the company commanders turned around and shouted, "Move out!" With the order, over 300 people pulled the black scarves from their necks to their noses, revealing only their eyes. They quickly flew into the sky, with Guan Yu following closely behind. In an instant, the entire field became quiet, with only the flickering of fire. Standing on the roof, Yu Qianqiu shook his head and sighed. Not bad. From the time of the emergency assembly to the time of departure, it took less than 10 minutes. Sigh. But their weapons are different, and their cultivation methods are also different. I wonder if they can unleash the greatest power in a group battle. Looks like I'll have to find an opportunity to drag them out and test it out. Currently, Yu Qianqiu was the only one living in the small courtyard, and it was very quiet. Yang Qian was also very perceptive. When he saw that the direct disciple of the Alchemy Pavilion's managing elder and the daughter of the 10,000 Fragrance Gardens managing elder were together, he no longer assigned anyone to this courtyard. After the death of the Alchemy Pavilion's external deacon, Yin Shu, Guan Weiwu had not found anyone to replace him. For the time being, the internal deacon Yang Qian was in charge of all these miscellaneous matters. He had practically become the Alchemy Pavilion's chief steward, and had a lot of power. Yu Qianqiu leisurely walked towards the main hall of the Alchemy Pavilion. Many disciples would call him Martial Uncle when they saw him, and those of the same generation would greet each other. Those of a higher generation would also nod at him. As for the fact that his cultivation had already reached the core formation stage, he did not tell anyone on Fuxian Island. All in all, these days were quite comfortable. Thinking back to what Gu Qingyan had said when he saw his carefree life, he said, "You're the best. For someone of my cultivation, in a place like the Cultivation Pavilion, where experts are as common as clouds, it would be tiring to just greet and greet. It would be best for me to obediently hide and cultivate and not come out." "Do you know where Deacon Yang is?" Yu Qianqiu pulled a disciple over and asked. He had come to find Yang Qian. After the disciple greeted him, he told him that Yang Qian was in the main hall. When he walked into the main hall, he saw Yang Qian looking around. "Deacon Yang!" Yu Qianqiu shouted. Yang Qian turned around and saw that it was him. He shook his head and said with a smile, "It's really difficult to see you even once. Tell me, why did you take the initiative to find me this time? Look at what you're saying. Aren't you too busy right now? I don't want to disturb you so often." Yu Qianqiu joked. The two of them had always had a good relationship, and would often joke around like this when they met. "I still have things to do. If you have something to say, just say it," Yang Qian said bluntly. Yu Qianqiu nodded and asked, I heard that all the sects are going to send more people to the Cultivation Alliance. Is this true? You still don't know if it's true or not. Didn't the person in Wanfan Garden tell you? Yang Qian smiled meaningfully. I only heard about this. I don't know the specifics. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to disturb you. Oh. Yang Qian smiled noncommittally. He paused and said, It's true. The cause is the matter between Ong Kwangsung and the Demon Blood Palace. Both sides have stopped fighting, but this time, many sects were involved. Regarding Ong Kwangsung always stirring up trouble, all the righteous sects in the cultivation world are very angry. Therefore, they decided to strengthen the Cultivation Alliance in name only. It will truly play a role of fair adjudication. Those sects that cause trouble will be punished together. Right now, all the sects are discussing the specifics. I reckon that in a few days, they will send people to put it into action. Yu Qianqiu nodded in thought. So it was like this. He understood. Yang Qian looked at him and said strangely, Why do you ask? Do you want to go? I advise you not to think about it. This kind of thing is usually led by the people of the Cultivation Pavilion. It has nothing to do with the people of the other sections. Chapter 148. What kind of logic is this? Yu Qianqiu frowned. Everyone is a disciple of Fuxian Island. Why is the Cultivation Pavilion in charge of this matter? Isn't the sect being a little too biased by doing this? His voice grew louder as he spoke. He wasn't excited, but he really wanted this chance to leave the island. With the name of Fuxian Island, Ong Kwangsung believed that everything would go smoothly. So what if the other party recognized that this Yu Qianqiu was that Yu Qianqiu? As long as he could see Chu Ping, or fulfill his promise, he would just deny it. He didn't believe that Ong Kwangsung would dare to detain a disciple of Fuxian Island. Even if he took a step back, could they detain him? As for what kind of trouble he would cause, that was a matter for the future. He had been away from Chu Ping for too long. On the surface, he looked like he was living comfortably, but who knew that there was a thorn in his throat? He couldn't eat or sleep well. He wanted to go according to his plan, but the time was too torturous. Who knew how long he would have to wait? Lower your voice. How dare you speak so carelessly? Yang Qian dragged him to a remote place outside the hall. He was slightly annoyed. Who said that the sect is biased? The disciples that are sent out represent the face of supporting Immortal Island. They might encounter unexpected situations at any time. That's why the Cultivation Pavilion has to choose the most elite disciples of the same cultivation level. How can you say that the sect is biased? Don't the other branches have elite disciples? Why do we have to choose from the Cultivation Pavilion? Yu Qianqiu was a little restless, so his words were a little direct. Yang Qian was indeed a little angry. A foundation establishment disciple actually dared to speak to him in such a tone. Then he thought of the two principal elders standing behind him and calmed himself down. Then he said earnestly, You've been on supporting Immortal Island for a long time. You have to know your priorities. What is the master? The Cultivation Pavilion was the foundation of the entire supporting Immortal Island. Every generation's sect master was a principal elder of the Cultivation Pavilion, so the Cultivation Pavilion was the master. The existence of the other branches is to cooperate with the Cultivation Pavilion. This is the first time. Seeing that Yu Qianqiu's face was still dark, he explained again. This trip to the Cultivation Alliance isn't like usual. We'll have to work with other sects for a long time. To put it bluntly, the people who go out are related to the reputation of Fuxian Island, the #1 sect in the world. Those who can go are the elite disciples of various cultivation periods. The sect has already decided that in addition to appointing a Pavilion of Cultivation elder as the person in charge, 3 days from now, there will be a selection competition at the Pavilion of Cultivation to select 5 nascent soul disciples and 10 core formation disciples. Foundation establishment disciples will not be included. His last sentence was undoubtedly telling Yu Qianqiu, You're still in the foundation establishment stage, don't count on it. Yu Qianqiu furrowed his brows and asked, What kind of screening method? Did the sect stipulate that only disciples of the Pavilion of Cultivation can participate? No, as long as you're in the nascent soul or core formation stage, you can participate. The nascent soul disciples will be in the top 5, and the core formation disciples will be in the top 10. However, according to convention, the other branches won't participate. In fact, they don't have to participate. You can imagine the result. On one side are disciples who have no time to cultivate, and on the other side are disciples who put all their energy into cultivation. Among the disciples of the same level, how many can be a match for the Pavilion of Cultivation? Yu Qianqiu happily said, Deacon Yang, if I want to participate, where do I go to sign up? Seeing that this guy still didn't give up, Yang Qian said with a slightly unhappy expression. What? Did you just ignore what I just said? Didn't you hear me say that Foundation Establishment disciples can't participate? Who said I'm a Foundation Establishment disciple? Said Yu Qianqiu with a smile. He stretched out a palm, and a plume of smoke rose up from his palm. In an instant, 3 Bingdi lotuses were condensed, swaying in the wind in a lifelike manner. 2 of the lotuses were in full bloom. The other one was still a bud and hadn't bloomed yet, but it clearly told the other party that his cultivation had reached the early stage of core formation. Early stage of core formation. Yang Qian was dumbstruck. If he remembered correctly, when Yu Qianqiu first came to Fuxian Island, he was only at the 10th level of qi refining. It had only been 6 or 7 years, but he had already reached the early stage of core formation. How was this possible? But the truth was right in front of him. Without this cultivation, it was impossible to release one's vitality and form 3 vivid twin lotuses. Yang Qian's throat trembled. He himself had spent more than 50 years to reach the early stage of core formation, which was not bad. After a long time he said, Core formation disciples can go to Penglai Pavilion's utility hall to register for the competition. Suddenly he remembered something and changed the topic. Wait for me here, don't leave yet. With that he ran away. Yu Qianqiu was startled, and didn't know what he was going to do. After waiting for a while, he saw Yang Qian and Guan Weiwu rushing over. He groaned in his heart. Damn it. Looks like I have to bleed a little this time. Otherwise, I won't be able to fool them. Guan Weiwu walked up to him and asked with a serious expression, Are you really at the early stage of core formation? What is going on? You should know that this is not a small matter. Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you. I have something to say to you in private. I also want to go to your pill room to show you something. You want to go to my pill room? Guan Weiwu's eyes flashed as he looked at his favorite disciple and said, Follow me. Yu Qianqiu obediently followed his master to the elder's pill room, under the alchemy pavilion. Yang Qian knew that the master and disciple had something private to talk about, so he didn't follow. Guan Weiwu turned around and said, There's only the 2 of us here. If you have something to say, say it. Yu Qianqiu embarrassedly said, I deserve to die. I shouldn't have hidden it from you. In fact, I have long since developed a better method to make the vitality pill. However, I was blinded by greed and secretly made a lot of it for myself. That's why I was able to forcefully raise my cultivation to the core formation stage in a few years. His voice became softer and softer, as if he had made a huge mistake. What? Guan Weiwu cried out in surprise. Is what you said true? Then his face was full of surprise. He eagerly rubbed his palms and regretfully said, Why didn't you say so earlier? AI, why didn't you say so earlier? Damn it! If it wasn't for this competition and the fact that the 10,000 Fragrance Garden has a limited supply of spirit herbs, I wouldn't have said it even if I was beaten to death. Yu Qianqiu muttered in his heart and explained, Actually, I wanted to tell Master long ago, but I made a mistake first, so I didn't dare to say it. This time, I heard that there is a competition at the Cultivation Pavilion, but no one from my Alchemy Pavilion is participating. This disciple can't take this lying down, and wants to compete with the disciples of the Cultivation Pavilion. That's why I said this. I hope Master can see this disciple's sincerity, and help this disciple out of this predicament. This disciple promises not to do this again. Let's not talk about this for now. There are spirit herbs for refining the vitality pill. First, refine a furnace for me to see. Guan Weiwu pointed to a pile of spirit herbs to the side with an anxious expression. Yu Qianqiu shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "The Pavilion of Cultivation's competition requires those who are at least core formation to participate. Because of this, I revealed my cultivation level. I thought about how I would refine pills for myself. I don't know what the consequences would be if word got out. Right now my heart is in a mess. How could I still have the mood to refine pills?" Guan Weiwu was surprised and immediately shouted, "Who dares to say that you did it for yourself? If anyone dares to say that, tell them to come find me. Everything was clearly arranged by me, so what are you worried about?" He then laughed mischievously and said, "Good disciple, come, refine a furnace for Master to see. Master will take care of everything else for you, so you don't need to worry." Chapter 149. AI. This kind of thing, he could only fool him. In fact, he didn't know how many origin chi pills he would need to take to break through from foundation establishment to core formation. To be able to be so fast was all because of the top-grade spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu bowed to the ground again. "Thank you, Master, for your help. No need to be so polite. Quickly let Master see how you refine the origin chi pills." Guan Weiwu couldn't wait any longer. Yu Qianqiu immediately picked up a few spiritual herbs, threw them into the furnace, and concentrated on refining. Guan Weiwu's divine sense followed and once again witnessed his disciple's miraculous refining technique. He shook his head and sighed. He couldn't figure out what was going on. With his own alchemy attainments, he couldn't learn such a technique. Yu Qianqiu also couldn't figure out why his master was so stupid. Even that brat Chen Feng had learned his refining technique quite well, but he still couldn't get the hang of it. Perhaps it was because he didn't teach him diligently. But he was his master, and the disciple teaching his master was too embarrassing for anyone to ask. Yu Qianqiu actually didn't know that his refining technique was actually faster for newcomers who had never come into contact with alchemy. The more experienced they were, the more they would have their own deep-rooted beliefs. It wasn't something that could be changed easily. 20 origin chi pills were fresh out of the furnace. Guan Weiwu looked at the hazy pill halo in his hand and sighed again and again. "So it's like this, disciple. You're really a genius." Master pondered for a lifetime and couldn't figure it out, but AI. Master will help you ask the sect for credit. "Don't, Master. Please don't do this again. Actually, without Master's strong support, I wouldn't have been able to comprehend the refining method with peace of mind. This credit should be Master's." Yu Qianqiu said sincerely. In his heart he thought, "I'll only be at ease if you accept the benefits." Unexpectedly, Guan Weiwu shook his head and smiled bitterly. "What kind of person do you think Master is?" In the end, Yu Qianqiu rejected it a few times, but it still didn't work. When it came to respecting intellectual property rights, the old man was fair and just leaving people speechless. It was easy to imagine what happened next. Sect Master Feng Xiangtian arrived with a group of elders. After confirming the truth, Yu Qianqiu almost couldn't raise his head due to the praise. Feng Xiangtian was so happy that he immediately ordered people to give Yu Qianqiu 10,000 upper-grade spirit stones. This really shocked the surrounding people. All the elders looked at this millionaire with a strange expression. This was not a small amount of money, but it was indeed worth it compared to his contribution. The sect leader happily led the group of people away. Guan Weiwu pulled Yu Qianqiu to the side and quietly explained some things to him. The latter was pleasantly surprised and nodded repeatedly to thank his master, while the former began to arrange the refining plan of the essence chi pill in the alchemy pavilion. Yu Qianqiu never got involved in this kind of thing. He left the alchemy pavilion and went directly to Penglai pavilion. When he arrived at the miscellaneous hall's chore office and asked to participate in the pavilion of cultivations competition, the disciples in the chore office looked at each other in dismay. They didn't expect a disciple of the alchemy pavilion to participate in this competition. According to the rules, they had to accept it, but when they checked Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, they found that it was still early-stage foundation establishment. Thus, They told him that he had to go to the Pavilion of Cultivation to prove his cultivation as early-stage core formation, before he was qualified to participate in this competition. Yu Qianqiu immediately went to the Pavilion of Cultivation, and found that he couldn't prove his cultivation beyond his cultivation level. As a result, he went from mid-stage foundation establishment to late-stage foundation establishment to early-stage core formation in one go, causing the elders who helped him to be a bit confused. He didn't care about this and went to the Penglai Pavilion's chore office again. He finally successfully signed up to participate in the Pavilion of Cultivation's competition. Just as he was about to leave the chore office, he ran into someone he really didn't want to see. Someone who looked at him with hostility every time they met. Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, "Elder Yan." With that, he was about to leave. "Yu Qianqiu, take care," the chore office's head Elder Yan Ta said coldly. Yu Qianqiu stopped, turned around and said respectfully, "Elder Yan, what's the matter?" Yan Ta said in a deep voice, "Why do you hide when you see me? Did you do something shameful?" Elder Yan must be joking. Disciple wouldn't dare. "I have something to ask you. Do you dare to answer me honestly?" Disciple will definitely tell you everything I know. Actually, Yu Qianqiu wasn't afraid of him, but he really didn't want to provoke him. After staying on supporting Immortal Island for so many years, Yu Qianqiu more or less knew some things. Although supporting Immortal Island was known as the #1 sect in the cultivation world, it wasn't a monolithic entity. It was actually controlled by a few internal forces. These forces had always been competing in the dark, and they all wanted to take control of supporting Immortal Island. Starting from Ma Jiugu's generation, the Guan family produced many talented people, and that generation started to take control of supporting Immortal Island. When it came to Guan Dinghai's generation, because of his daughter's matter, Guan Dinghai was pushed down from the position of sect master by the opposition. However, the Guan family didn't want to hand over the power to the opposition. Normally, the position would be passed to the next generation, Guan Weiwu. However, Guan Weiwu was too disappointing and couldn't take up such a big responsibility. In the end, the Guan family pushed Guan Dinghai's eldest personal disciple, Feng Xiangtian, to the position of sect master. It should be said that the power of supporting Immortal Island still belonged to the Guan family. As for Yu Qianqiu, as Guan Weiwu's personal disciple, he was also a member of the Guan family. In the past, Yu Qianqiu didn't know about it, so he always went against Yan Shu. Now that he knew and understood that Yan Shu happened to be a member of the opposition, he couldn't help but feel that it was a close call. If he wasn't careful, he would be involved in the competition between the major forces. That wasn't a joke. Any one of them could be stronger than a sect like Ong Kwangsung. He really couldn't afford to offend them. Yan Tua stroked his beard and said in a deep voice, "I heard something recently. I heard that during the Demon Ghost Region's trial, when the Ghost General killed the disciples of various sects in a big tent, you were also in that big tent. Is that true?" "Yes. I also heard that you have a good relationship with the Ghost General, and saved many people. Why didn't you save the people in the big tent as well?" When Yan Tua said this, his tone revealed a bit of fierceness. Obviously, he was still brooding over his son's death. "Damn it. Your son wanted to kill me that time, but he was already killed by me in advance. You still want me to save him? Old bastard, is there something wrong with your head?" Yu Qianqiu sighed and said, "Elder Yan, you may not know this, but at that time, the Ghost General ordered us to meet him within an hour. A group of disciples with weaker cultivation really had nowhere to hide, so we could only do as he said. As a result, some disciples disobeyed the Ghost General's order, which made the Ghost General furious. At that time, I begged him bitterly, but the Ghost General never showed mercy to those who dared to disobey him, so, sigh." Yan Tuo's face twitched for a while before he asked again, "With the Ghost General's strength, killing them is naturally a piece of cake. Why did he have to capture them in the tent before killing them?" "Old bastard, I asked the Ghost General to do this in order to kill your son. How dare you be so fierce to me? You see how I'll deal with you." Yu Qianqiu paused and said, "Elder Yan, I won't hide it from you. Actually, I've been suspecting something." "Don't talk in riddles with me." Yan Tua snorted coldly. Yu Qianqiu nodded and said with a troubled expression, I accidentally heard something at that time, and I don't know if I heard it wrong. I didn't dare to say it because it's not a small matter after all. Actually, I suspect that those people are not dead. Yan Tuo's body trembled, and he grabbed Yu Qianqiu's shoulder and said while gasping for breath, What did you say? What did you hear at that time? Why do you suspect that those people are not dead? Chapter 150. Sigh. Old fart, it's easy if you're anxious, but I'm afraid you're not. Yu Qianqiu looked at the hand on his shoulder and told him seriously, Elder Yan, you're hurting me. Ah. Yan Tuo reacted and immediately let go of his hand. He squeezed out an ugly smile and said, Tell me your suspicions. Yes. Since Elder Yan has asked, I will naturally tell you the truth. Yu Qianqiu lowered his head and pondered for a while. He then raised his head and said, Elder Yan, you might not know, but Ghost General has a concubine named Yuji. My suspicions are related to her. At that time, when I begged the Ghost General to let those disciples go, I ended up angering the Ghost General, and he chased me out. Before I came out, I seem to have heard that Yuji begging the Ghost General not to kill those people. Yan Tuo's eyes widened. Didn't you say that you saw Ghost General kill those disciples with your own eyes? Who said that? I've never said that I saw the Ghost General kill them with my own eyes. I don't dare to say things that I don't have proof. You must know that when Ghost General broke camp, I didn't even see the bodies of those disciples. All the disciples who were there saw it. Yu Qianqiu looked very innocent. Yan Tuo swallowed hard and said with an agitated expression, Then do you remember what Yuji said at that time? Elder Yan, don't rush me. It's been so long. Let me think about it. Yu Qianqiu frowned. Yan Tuo quickly nodded and said, Think about it. Think about it slowly. I won't rush you once you've thought it through. Yu Qianqiu made a few gestures as if he was thinking about it carefully. Yan Tuo waited at the side with a bitter smile, which almost made the former want to laugh. After a long time he slowly nodded and said, General, I think Yuji's original words were like this. General, I've seen those servants who serve me in Chiliwind Valley for thousands of years, and I'm really tired of them. Why don't you let them go and send them to Chiliwind Valley to be servants? What do you think? Yu Qianqiu imitated Yuji's speech vividly, and came back to his senses. He said seriously, If I remember correctly, that should be what she said. Then do you remember if Ghost General promised her or not? Yan Tuo asked excitedly. Yu Qianqiu frowned and said thoughtfully, Because I had already walked out of the tent at that time. I seemed to vaguely hear Ghost General say very good, or something. But after thinking about it, I think I must have heard it wrong. Otherwise, after Ghost General let them go, how could we not even see their shadows? Alas! Elder Yan, just pretend that I didn't say what I said today. I'm just guessing about what happened that day. Let's take everyone's conclusion as the truth. I still have something to do and will leave first. Yan Tuo stood there in a daze. After a long time, he came back to his senses and found that Yu Qianqiu had already disappeared. He opened his mouth and froze in place. 2 days later, on the square in front of the main hall of Penglai Pavilion, a big wooden sign announced the list of the competition, which attracted many people to watch. There were nearly 300 disciples participating in the nascent soul stage competition, and nearly 1,000 disciples participating in the core formation stage competition. Almost all of them were disciples of the cultivation pavilion. However, there was one exception. At the bottom was written, Alchemy Pavilion, Early Stage Core Formation, Yu Qianqiu. Set off by the more than 1,000 pavilion of cultivation disciples, it was exceptionally prominent. Perhaps someone was deliberately making fun of it, but the words at the very bottom were twice as large as the ones at the top. It was impossible for it not to stand out. This news immediately caused an uproar on Fuxian Island. First, no one expected the famous Yu Qianqiu to reach the core formation stage so quickly. Second, no one expected something that had not been seen for thousands of years to happen. There were actually disciples from other sects who wanted to compete with the cultivation pavilion. It was really exciting. In comparison, No one paid attention to how his cultivation level increased so quickly. Everyone was guessing how many rounds Yu Qianqiu could last. Due to the celebrity effect, the Alchemy Pavilion suddenly became the focal point of Fuxian Island. As long as someone met a disciple of the Alchemy Pavilion, they would stop them and ask them about Yu Qianqiu. The questions they asked were very strange. In short, most people felt that Yu Qianqiu was looking for a thrill. Yu Qianqiu's courtyard was also constantly visited by guests. The first to visit was Farong. After the two of them parted ways, Gu Qingyan came again. The moment he saw Yu Qianqiu, he asked in amazement, "Tisk tsk, your actions are no different from challenging the cultivation pavilion. There are many core formation disciples in our cultivation pavilion who want to meet you in the first battle. They want to defeat you and make a name for themselves. By the way, when did you reach the core formation stage? How come I didn't know? It seems it is good to have a principal elder of the Alchemy Pavilion as a master. Elder Guan must have given you a lot of elixirs, right? Otherwise, how could your cultivation level increase so quickly? Do you have anything good for me?" Yu Qianqiu directly coaxed this meddlesome woman who asked a lot of questions to leave. Not long after, Cheng Yingqing heard the news and came again. After praising his courage, he shook his head and left with a sigh. Following that, Yang Qian also came. He said helplessly, "You really dared to do it." He walked around him a few times and also left. Soon after, Ko Xuehua and the other two women, as well as Xiao Wanqing from the safe pavilion, also came together. The four women were very confident in him. Xiao Wanqing even encouraged him and declared, "Tomorrow, the four of us will watch your battle together." Yu Qianqiu thanked the four women and saw them off. Just as he was about to take a breath, his master came again. Guan Weiwu stared at him from head to toe countless times and finally sighed. "Disciple, if possible, try to hold on for a few more matches. You have to know that if you lose the first match, it will not look good for our Alchemy Pavilion. I didn't think you would really be so impulsive." After he finished speaking, he scratched his dirty hair and left in confusion. He originally thought that those who should come were all here, and that it should be about time. Who knew that there would be more people coming, and each of them was higher than the last. First, there was a person who surprised him. Yin Tua actually came personally and encouraged him before leaving. Then, the head elder of Wanfeng Garden, Fernan, also came. Elder Fernan was like a father-in-law looking at his son-in-law. He nodded with gratification and said, "Since you have signed up, don't think too much. When the time comes, go all out. So what if it is the cultivation pavilion? We are all at core formation stage. Why should we be afraid of them?" Yu Qianqiu repeatedly said yes and sent him out. The person who came next shocked Yu Qianqiu. It was actually his master's father, the current Guan Dinghai, the previous head of Fuxian Island. Guan Dinghai stared at him deeply and asked, "Did you decide this yourself or your master? Or did someone else make you do this?" After Yu Qianqiu repeatedly stressed that it was his decision, Guan Dinghai nodded noncommittally and left. It was hard to tell if he was happy or unhappy. Yu Qianqiu heaved a sigh of relief. He thought about everyone and thought, Ma Jiugu will be next. Unfortunately, he guessed correctly. Ma Jiugu really came with Lan Bingxue. Ma Jiugu revealed a rare smile and said, "I was right about you. A man shouldn't be so timid. It's so good to be young." Before leaving, she added, "There is something you don't know. Not long after you left the mulberry garden, that girl Yan Zixia went back. As for where she went, I think you should know, right?" With that said, she trembled and walked away. Lan Bingxue looked at him with a complicated gaze. Not far from the courtyard, there were two nascent soul disciples chatting. When they saw the people coming and going, they couldn't help but notice them. When they saw that the people coming were all of higher ranks than the other, they were speechless. They looked at each other and quickly left. They were afraid that they would see something the higher-ups didn't want them to see. Yu Qianqiu stood at the entrance of the courtyard and took a deep breath. He really didn't think that participating in a competition would cause such a big commotion. After confirming that no one else would come, he decided to take a good rest. No matter what, he had to rest for tomorrow's competition. In fact, he was worried that the sect head would also come. Chapter 151. The competition was held in the large square in front of the main hall of the cultivation pavilion. There were people everywhere, on the ground, on the trees, on the roofs. Sect head Feng Xiangtian and the other elders stood on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. They looked around and were secretly shocked. Why did so many disciples come to watch? There had been no lack of similar competitions in the past, but it was definitely not as influential as this one. It actually completely surrounded the surroundings. What they didn't know was that other than the disciples from the cultivation pavilion, almost all the disciples from the other factions who had nothing to do had come. Those who had something to do had already finished what they were doing. All of them wanted to see Yu Qianqiu from the alchemy pavilion. It wasn't because Yu Qianqiu had a lot of influence on them, but because Yu Qianqiu's actions were what the other factions wanted to do but didn't dare to do. It was their dream. They were hoping that Yu Qianqiu would be able to break the undefeated legend of the cultivation pavilion on supporting Immortal Island and help them, who were inferior to him, vent their anger. That was all. Many disciples from the other factions who hadn't reached Foundation establishment sighed. They were depressed that they couldn't come out and watch the competition. Around the square, the disciples from the other factions stood together with the people from the cultivation pavilion. The alchemy pavilion had already become the focus of the audience. Even before it appeared, its limelight had already overshadowed the pavilion of cultivation. Who knew how many people were pointing and whispering? The pavilion of cultivation, on the other hand, had become a foil. This made the disciples of the pavilion of cultivation very unhappy. This time, the alchemy pavilion came out in full force. Other than a few disciples who hadn't reached Foundation establishment, everyone else came to support Yu Qianqiu. Even Guan Weiwu stood on the platform of the cultivation pavilion. A few elders walked out of the cultivation pavilion's main hall, led by Dongfang Changao. Behind them, a few disciples carried out a few large boxes and lined them up in front of the cultivation pavilion's main hall. The elders each walked in front of a large box. Dongfang Chang, Ao's voice echoed throughout the square. There are a total of 987 disciples participating in the core formation competition. For fairness, we have decided to draw lots. There are 2 sets of wooden lots numbered from 1 to 493 in these 4 boxes. Those who draw the same number will compete against each other. Because there is only one person, there is a white lot in each box. The disciple who draws the white lot will advance to the second round of the competition. Now all participating disciples, come and draw lots. Yang Qian turned around to look at Yu Qian, who was beside him, and said with a bitter smile, "The 987th place will be decided by drawing lots. You'll have to win at least 7 matches in a row to get into the top 10. You'd better be prepared." Yu Qianqiu smiled indifferently and walked towards the lottery box in the main hall. The moment he walked out, he attracted the attention of tens of thousands of disciples. Almost everyone's head turned towards the direction of the alchemy pavilion. Feng Xiangtian and the others, who were standing on top of the cultivation pavilion, could clearly see the changes in their surroundings. The white faces on both sides of their heads turned to the back of their heads. It was a spectacular sight. Many elders laughed. Elder Mo of the alchemy pavilion said eccentrically, "Old Guan, this disciple of yours is interesting." Guan Weiwu turned his head and stared at him. "What? You're not convinced? If you have the ability, your alchemy pavilion can also pull out a disciple like this." Elder Mo chuckled. "I know myself. Since I know it will be embarrassing to pull him out, it's better if I don't pull him out. The 2 of you are bickering. Can't you see that there are tens of thousands of disciples below?" Sect Master Feng Xiangtian snorted coldly without turning his head back. The 2 principal elders immediately stared at each other without saying a word. Actually, Yu Qianqiu still wanted to keep a low profile. However, all the other disciples had come out from the cultivation pavilion. He was the only one who walked out from the alchemy pavilion. It was impossible for him not to attract attention. Yu Qianqiu looked around. There were bright eyes staring at him everywhere. It was as if he had become a rare animal in the zoo. Damn it! Look, look. I won't collect money. Yu Qianqiu muttered to himself as he slowly walked over. There were nearly 1,000 people waiting to draw lots anyway. There was no hurry. Needless to say, his calm and unhurried demeanor made many people admire him. There were many people, so the people who had drawn lots consciously stood on both sides. Seeing that the lots were almost drawn, Yu Qianqiu found a box with fewer people and stood in line. He slowly approached the box. When it was his turn, he realized that the elder who was holding the box with one hand had used his divine sense to protect the box. Obviously, he was afraid that someone would insert their divine sense into the box to cheat. Yu Qianqiu didn't think about cheating. To him, it was the same no matter who he fought. He reached into the box and found that it was almost empty. His fingers touched one and he grabbed it. After taking it out, he didn't look at it and stood to the side obediently. However, he found that the surrounding disciples were looking at him as if they were demons looking at Tang Seng's flesh. Not long after, the lots were drawn. Dongfeng Chang, Ao glanced at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "Those who have drawn the white lot, hand over your white lot and wait for the next round of drawing lots." Everyone looked at the lot in their hands, and then looked at each other. Yu Qianqiu didn't know the people around him, so he stood there obediently. He didn't believe that his luck was so good that he could draw the white lot from nearly 1,000 people. After a while, no one stood out among the disciples. Everyone looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. Feng Xiangtian's face instantly darkened. He stared at Dongfeng Chang, Ao and shouted, "Chang Ao, what's going on?" Dongfeng Chang, Ao bowed to the people upstairs, then turned around and said sternly, "Look at the lots in your hands again. Look carefully." Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt a little bad. Was his luck really so good? How did he get a free lot just like that? He opened the lot in his hand and looked at it from the front to the back. Suddenly, a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. Both sides of this thin piece of wood were smooth. It was difficult to find even the slightest flaw, let alone find the words. It was a good thing to draw the white lot, but it was a little hot in his hand. Wasn't it asking for his life? The joke was a little too much. Did everyone look at the lot in your hand clearly? The disciples who drew the white lot stand out. Dongfeng Chang Ao was very depressed. Such a small thing actually caused the sect leader to scold him in front of everyone. "Elder Dongfeng, is the lot without words called the white lot?" Someone in the crowd raised a hand and asked weakly. Dongfeng Chang Ao said snappily yes. Yu Qianqiu quickly flashed out of the crowd and ran to Dongfeng Chang Ao with a white lot in his hand. He handed it over with both hands and said in fear and trepidation, "This disciple really didn't know that the lot without words was a white lot. Elder, please punish me." Everyone almost fainted. The surroundings suddenly became lively and there was endless laughter. Dongfeng Chang Ao's face was so gloomy that water could be wrung out. Feng Xiangtian, who was upstairs, saw that the disciple was actually Yu Qianqiu. His mouth opened but he didn't say anything. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were dumbfounded. Elder Mo of the equipment refining pavilion lowered his head and hit his head on the railing. He laughed so hard that he couldn't stand straight. After a while he gasped and said, "Old Guan, this disciple of yours is too good at torturing people. When has Dongfeng Chang Ao been played like this before? Being in the limelight like this will kill people, haha." Chapter 152. Dongfeng Chang Ao naturally knew who Yu Qianqiu was. He turned around and looked at the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, do you know where you are? Is this a place where you can mess around? Since you didn't know anything, I'll forgive you for now. If you do it again, I won't let you off lightly." Yu Qianqiu bowed in gratitude. "Chang Ao, let's continue." Dongfeng Chang Ao nodded and turned around to look at Yu Qianqiu. He looked around and shouted, "Alchemy Pavilion's Yu Qianqiu has drawn the white lot, and will advance to the next round of the competition unconditionally. Those who have drawn lots 1 to 10, stay here. The rest of the disciples can leave for now." Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu let out a sigh of relief. As if he had been granted amnesty, he jogged back to the Alchemy Pavilion. Seeing him like this, many people laughed to death. Among the cultivation pavilion's crowd, Gu Qingyan shook his head helplessly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing, who was mixed in the crowd of Wanfeng Garden, fell powerlessly on Ko Xuehua's shoulder. She couldn't stop giggling. The other girls also couldn't help but smile. Unfortunately, Furong didn't like crowded places and didn't come this time. Otherwise, who knew what she would think if she saw this? Yusai, I really don't know what to say to you. Yang Qian smiled bitterly as he looked at Yu Qianqiu, who had run back to his side. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands at the alchemy pavilion disciples and said, I really didn't do it on purpose. I've made a fool of myself in front of everyone. I'm really sorry. Everyone revealed a smile of support. After the spectators laughed, they were greatly disappointed. They had come here mainly for Yu Qianqiu. Who would have thought that he would run into him when there was a 1 in 1,000 chance? Who could they go to talk to about this? The plaza was large enough, and it was divided into 10 areas, each supervised by 10 elders. This time, the competition between the 10 pairs of disciples began. The joke just now was also temporarily thrown aside by the crowd, and their attention shifted to the competition. The sword transformed into a stream of light, crisscrossing in all directions. Silhouettes flashed and shouted. For a moment, the entire square was filled with the sound of metal clashing, and there were even sounds of collisions. After the competition, most of the 10 disciples who lost were injured. Some were even carried away with serious injuries. Those who were on good terms with Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but worry for him. Death and injury were allowed in this competition. Naturally, the goal was to allow the participants to display their full strength. Looking at the competition just now, many people had shown mercy. Perhaps it was because they were disciples of the same faction, so it was not good for them to kill. Otherwise, they would not be able to explain themselves when they returned. But for Yu Qianqiu, it would not be so good. Most of the disciples who signed up for the competition were late core formation stage disciples. At the same time, they were also the elites of the cultivation pavilion. Think about it, if there was a large difference in cultivation, they would have already suffered a great loss. Although they were all core formation cultivators, Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 whole layers lower than theirs. If his opponent didn't show mercy, then Yu Qianqiu's situation would be obvious. Yu Qianqiu had also discovered that the closer the cultivation of the 2 disciples, the more dangerous the battle would be. Everyone wanted to win, and would often attack with the intention of killing the other. As a result, once the victor was decided, one side would either die or be seriously injured. It was not like when there was a large difference in cultivation. Those with higher cultivation could easily win, so they could control their strength. If the competition continued like this, then a few people would definitely die. Sure enough, in the second round, a disciple's head was cut off by his opponent. The smell of blood spread and seemed to have stimulated the competing disciples. The fighting became more and more intense, and both sides often attacked each other to kill. Yang Qian looked worriedly at Yu Qianqiu. He saw that Yu Qianqiu's eyes were slightly narrowed. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the cultivation pavilion, frowned. Guan Weiwu called him over and said, Weiwu, although Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was forcibly raised to the core formation stage by you, there is still a gap between him and the other disciples. His talent in alchemy is really rare. If something happens to him, it will be a great loss to supporting Immortal Island. What I mean is, should you let him think about it? If it really doesn't work, let him go up and admit defeat. Didn't he draw a blank this round? It's not too late to let him withdraw from the competition now. The elders on the side thought about it, and felt that sect leader was right. Yu Qianqiu's alchemy was a secret to others, but most of the people upstairs had seen Yu Qianqiu's alchemy with their own eyes. His talent was really great. If anything happened to him, it would be a great loss for supporting Immortal Island. They couldn't help but nod in agreement with sect leader's opinion. Guan Weiwu was taken aback. Senior brother, wouldn't my alchemy pavilion lose face? Sect leader, I don't think it's necessary. Ferdinand walked over and said with a frown. What's the use of refining elixirs no matter how good he is? If he runs away from a competition with his fellow disciples, I'm afraid he won't be able to raise his head in supporting Immortal Island for the rest of his life. Unless he leaves supporting Immortal Island in the future. In Ferdinand's mind, he didn't want his daughter to follow a waste. Yes. Yes. Guan Weiwu echoed. Feng Xiangtian nodded slightly and turned his attention back to the competition. The elders didn't say anything. Nearly 1,000 people fought nearly 50 matches. A day passed just like that. In the end, most of the people who lost were injured. More than 10 disciples even lost their lives. Yu Qianqiu sat cross-legged on the ground and watched the competition from beginning to end without saying a word. Every time he saw those who killed their opponents, his eyes would unconsciously narrow and remember that person's face. There was no competition that night because it was held during the day. After the competition ended, the disciples of each faction quickly rushed back. If there was anything, they had to quickly finish it tonight. Yu Qianqiu couldn't run away from tomorrow's competition. Because there were 493 disciples who won today, and Yu Qianqiu who had advanced in advance, it was just an even number, and could be divided into 247 matches. So, it meant that there wouldn't be a situation where there would be a blank lot tomorrow. Tomorrow was really a good day that everyone was looking forward to. The next day the crowd didn't decrease at all. Their gazes were still focused on Yu Qianqiu who was drawing the lot. Yu Qianqiu touched the lot and held it firmly in his palm after taking a glance. A smile appeared on his lips. His luck wasn't bad. It was a round number. The number was 20. However, he didn't know who his opponent was. When he returned to the Elixir Refinery Pavilion, Yang Qian asked even though he already knew the answer, "Are you done?" Yu Qianqiu nodded. Seeing the worry in his eyes, he couldn't help but smile. Was there really so much to worry about? When he had been cultivating in Utopia, he had often gotten the 3 company commanders in the late-stage nascent soul realm to spar with him. That was not child's play. He was playing with real skills. Why would he be afraid of these disciples in the late-stage core formation realm? Yu Qianqiu calmly watched the competition in front of him. When he realized that his disciple, who had already killed someone yesterday, had actually killed another opponent today, Yu Qianqiu's eyes narrowed into slits, and a cold gleam flashed in them. The surrounding people watched the matches one after another, but they still didn't see Yu Qianqiu go up. They were all a little anxious, but they didn't know what number he had drawn. When Dongfangchang Ao announced the start of the 20th match of the day, Yu Qianqiu stood up and slowly walked towards the center of the stage. Yang Qian, who was standing to the side, let out a soft ah sound. Immediately, like a stone being tossed into 1,000 ripples, everyone's heads turned around. Their gazes all focused on the figure that was slowly walking towards the center of the stage. Chapter 153. The whole place was in an uproar. People were pointing at Yu Qianqiu, who was walking out. The sect leader and others in the attic were a little surprised. Looking at the disciples, they did not expect Yu Qianqiu to have such a great influence. Gu Qingyan was a little excited. Ever since the trial in the Demon Ghost region, Yu Qianqiu seemed to have become a legend that wasn't a legend. Although the two of them were on good terms, Yu Qianqiu still suppressed Gu Qingyan to the point that he couldn't breathe. Ko Xuehua and the other girls were also a little excited. So far, those who knew Yu Qianqiu in Fuxian Island had not seen him fight seriously. Their anticipation could be imagined. The 20 disciples gave the lots to Dongfangchang Ao. The attention of these disciples was also focused on Yu Qianqiu. Their eyes were fixed on the lot in his hand. It seemed that they were all looking forward to fighting with him. The 10 elders reported the number they needed to supervise, and the disciples followed them to the competition ground. When there was only Yu Qianqiu and another person left in front of the hall, the two of them turned their heads and looked at each other. Needless to say, you and I are opponents. The person who supervised the competition was Elder Sun, who went to the Demon Ghost region last time. He glanced at the two of them and said loudly, "The one who drew number 200, follow me." After that, he walked to the last competition ground, and the two of them followed him. I say this guy should work hard. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly and anxiously. There were traces of water on the railing that he had just grabbed. Obviously his palms were sweaty. Ferdinand, who was standing on the side, glanced at him and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I have paid attention to his opponent. He is not the kind of person who is cruel and merciless. Even if he can't win, it should not be a big deal." Because Yu Qianqiu often went to Wanfen Garden, many disciples of Wanfen Garden knew him. At this time, seeing him standing in the competition ground, they all talked about whether he could win or not. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls turned around and told them with certainty, "Yu Qianqiu will definitely be able to do it." The girls' blind worship didn't diminish at all. Ko Xiuehua, on the other hand, was much more rational. After hearing their words, she shook her head slightly. "Begin." Dongfang Chang'eo's voice rang out. The onlookers immediately fell silent. The sounds of fighting immediately rang out. However, this was not what everyone was concerned about. Everyone's attention was on the two people on the 10th stage. However, the two people in the field did not make a move for a long time. The two of them sized each other up for a while and suddenly laughed, causing the surrounding people to feel a little puzzled. Yu Qianqiu's opponent cupped his fists and said with a smile, "I'm Lu Guang, a late-stage core formation cultivator. You must be the legendary Yu Qianqiu who roamed the demon and ghost domain. I've heard so much about you. I didn't think that I would be the first to fight against you. It's an honor." "So it's Senior Martial Brother Lu. I've seen Senior Martial Brother fight yesterday. I hope Senior Martial Brother will go easy on me like yesterday." Yu Qianqiu smiled and returned the greeting. He had an impression of this person. He was the only person who didn't injure his opponent in the slightest yesterday. Other than showing that he had a good heart, it could also be seen that his cultivation level was also not bad from the way he attacked. "Are the two of you here to chat or to fight?" Elder Son, who was in charge of supervising the competition, was a little unhappy. The two of them first stood there for a while, then looked at each other, smiled, and chatted for a while. There were already a few battles in the other fields that had been decided, but the two of them still hadn't made a move. "Please." Lu Guang gestured for his opponent to make the first move. In his mind, there was a gap of 2 levels between their cultivation levels. This was a battle without any suspense. Even if he won, it would be a little unfair. Yu Qianqiu smiled and nodded. His entire aura suddenly changed. Although there was still a smile on his face, it was as if the person standing there wasn't a human, but an immovable mountain, indifferently looking down at the opponent in front of him. Lu Guang suddenly felt suffocated by the aura. He was shocked and the long sword on his back shot out with a clang. He circled around his body and carefully guarded himself. Elder Son's pupils also suddenly widened as he stared at Yu Qianqiu in surprise. The disciples who were watching the competition also noticed the strangeness here. Feng Xiangtian, who was on the pavilion, suddenly had a flash of light in his eyes. He stared at this place and slowly stroked his long beard. The group of elders also slightly squinted their eyes. At this moment, the other battles had already ended, but they still hadn't made a move. "Senior Brother Lu, be careful. The move I'm going to use is called One Sword of No Regrets. Please give me some pointers, Senior Brother Lu." Yu Qianqiu said indifferently, giving Lu Guang a great deal of pressure. He also didn't know why it was like this. His opponent's cultivation was obviously 2 levels lower than his, but he didn't know what he was afraid of. All of a sudden, everyone who was staring at the square seemed to see a flash of light. Before they could figure out what was going on, they saw a bright flying sword pointed straight at Lu Guang's throat. While everyone was silent and shocked, they heard the inging sound that could only be heard when a long sword was quickly unsheathed spread throughout the square. Everyone then reacted and was shocked. What a fast speed! The sword was already on his opponent's neck, and they only heard the sound of the sword being unsheathed. Oh my God! How fast was this speed? It was too terrifying. Without a doubt, it had already surpassed the speed of sound transmission. Elder Son was the closest person to the two competitors. With his cultivation, he could clearly see the sword's trajectory, but the speed of the sword was too shocking. Sect Master Feng Xiangtian's hand that was stroking his beard paused, and the group of elders were all stunned. Guan Weiwu's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of disbelief. Feeling the sharpness on his neck, Lu Guang smiled bitterly with a pale face. I've lost. The long sword that was circling around his body slowly returned to its scabbard. Was there still a need to compete? Lu Guang had already shown mercy, or else his head would have been separated from his neck. But this speed was too fast, so fast that he didn't even have the chance to react. Yu Qianqiu withdrew his aura, and his long sword flashed back into its scabbard. He turned to leave. Lu Guang suddenly shouted, Junior brother Yu, please wait. What's the matter, senior brother Lu? Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked. Junior brother Xie Yu, please show mercy. Lu Guang dejectedly bowed and asked for guidance. Just now, I heard junior brother Yu say that this move is called one sword without regrets. I felt that it was strange. I've never seen this sword technique in the Sutra Pavilion before. Junior brother Yu, please teach me so that I can understand why I lost. Yu Qianqiu calmly smiled and said, This sword technique was created when I was reading the Sutra Pavilion's sword techniques. Senior brother Lu, there's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank yourself. If it wasn't for senior brother Lu having the heart of a Buddha at the center of the competition yesterday, my sword should have no regrets. But in the end, I still regretted it and didn't dare to hurt senior brother Lu. Finished speaking, he turned around and walked towards the people from the alchemy pavilion. Lu Guang was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. It seemed that Lu Guang let him go because he didn't hurt anyone yesterday. Otherwise, that sword really would have taken his life. Thinking about it, he felt lucky for his momentary kindness yesterday. At this moment, the people from the cultivation pavilion were silent. The core formation stage disciples were all thinking about whether they could have dodged that sword if they were in Lu Guang's shoes. The other factions were boiling with excitement, as if they had won. Yu Qianqiu's sword had won beautifully. With just one sword, he had defeated the cultivation pavilion's disciple. Finally, they, the inferior disciples who did odd jobs, could vent their anger. Chapter 154. The outcome of the battle was naturally too surprising for everyone. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and laughed. Not bad, you brat. You didn't waste my effort. Ferdinand's face twitched. He turned his head and sneered. How dare you say that? What effort did you waste? What did you teach this disciple? Guan Weiwu rolled his eyes and snorted. This is between us, master and disciple. Why should I tell you? Ferdinand sneered disdainfully, and turned his head to ignore Guan Weiwu. Feng Xiangtian asked the person next to him. What sword skill in the Sutra Depository is good at speed? Why haven't I heard of it? Is this boy really so talented that he can actually comprehend some sword skill? With their cultivation, they naturally heard the conversation between Yu Qianqiu and Lu Guang. The person next to him had white hair and beard, a calm temperament, and a dignified aura. It was the cultivation pavilion's principal elder, Osihai. He said calmly, I have never seen any sword skill in the Sutra Depository that is good at speed. Even if he really comprehended it, so what? Speed? It's just an unorthodox skill. It's vulnerable in the face of absolute strength. The disciple who was defeated just now was just careless. Feng Xiangtian raised his eyebrows and did not say anything. He looked at the competition venue again. This round had only finished 20 matches. There were still nearly 5 matches left. The next matches had already begun. Most people were still immersed in Yu Qianqiu's match just now. They were obviously a little absent-minded in the following matches. The disciples of the alchemy pavilion were even less in the mood to watch. When they saw Yu Qianqiu walking back, they were all in high spirits and happily accepted the envious eyes of the other disciples. After he sat down cross-legged, Yang Qian smiled and said, What else do you have that we don't know? It turns out that you already have a card up your sleeve. We were worried for nothing. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, I was just lucky. My opponent's cultivation is higher than mine. My speed can only be used when he is unprepared. Now that I'm exposed, I'm afraid the next match won't be so easy. Yang Qian thought for a while and nodded slightly. I told you that Yu Qianqiu would be able to do it. Do you see now? I was right. Xiao Wanqing and the others were chatting with a group of female disciples in the myriad fragrance garden. Ko Shuahua shook her head. With Yu Qianqiu like this, the girls were afraid. The matches were over very quickly. Another dozen people lost their lives. Yu Qianqiu watched each match seriously, and found that the ones who killed their fellow disciples were always the same dozen people. They never showed mercy when they attacked. They were all ruthless characters. The second round of matches ended and 247 people were decided. The third round of drawing lots began. This time there was also a white lot. Yu Qianqiu had learned his lesson, and immediately looked at the lot he drew. It was number 36, which was the third match of the third round. It seemed that good luck would not always be on his side. This kind of fight between cultivators would not last too long. Usually, the winner would be decided in less than 10 minutes. Because the arena was divided, the range of movement was restricted. Those who were strong had to win as soon as possible, so that they would not be given too much time. Otherwise, how long would it take to fight nearly 1,000 matches from start to finish? Of course, the disciples who were good at fighting were at a disadvantage, but it was a test of their overall strength. After the 2 matches were over, Dongfengchang, Ao announced the preparation for the third match. Yu Qianqiu immediately stood up and handed in the wooden lot. When he arrived at arena number 6, he saw that his opponent was one of the dozen people who were easy to kill. After 2 matches, he had killed 2 people in a row. Yu Qianqiu could not help but squint his eyes. Many people also noticed the situation, and many of them were worried for Yu Qianqiu. As soon as Dongfengchang, Ao announced the start of the match, Yu Qianqiu wanted to bow and ask for his opponent's name. Just as he cupped his fists, his opponent's long sword quickly shot out and slashed at his head. There was no room for negotiation. Yu Qianqiu was taken aback. Fortunately, his flying speed was extremely fast. In an instant, a sword light flashed behind him and directly blocked the flying sword. The flying sword was originally connected to the mind. Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 levels lower than his opponent's. In addition, it happened suddenly and his mind was unstable. How could he resist the opponent's premeditated attack? He only felt that the heavy blow from the sword shook his mind. His chest was stuffy, his throat was sweet, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The sudden change surprised everyone. They did not expect that the cultivation pavilion's disciple, who was 2 levels higher than his opponent, would still use a sneak attack. Guan Weiwu, who was on the attic, saw this and was about to fly out to save his disciple, but he was grabbed by Ferdinand, who was next to him. Yu Qianqiu was in a trance. His mind had already lost contact with the flying sword, and the flying sword fell to the ground with a clang. The man smiled sinisterly. After shaking off the opponent's sword, he flipped the sword in the air and shot it straight at Yu Qianqiu. At the moment when the connection between the sword and the mind was broken, Yu Qianqiu suddenly woke up. He suddenly felt something was wrong, and his figure quickly dodged. He saw a stream of light rushing into the place where he was just standing. There was a loud bang on the bluestone floor. Stone chips flew everywhere, and a hole was directly blasted on the ground. Yu Qianqiu's figure dodged and stabilized his mind. When his divine sense had just reconnected with the flying sword on the ground, he saw the opponent's figure flashed and stepped on the flying sword on the ground. Yu Qianqiu immediately felt that the connection between his mind and the flying sword was broken again. A cold light flashed again from the hole in the ground and whistled straight over. Yu Qianqiu flipped backwards, and the cold light brushed past his body. However, before he could stabilize his body, he heard a whistling sound behind him. He immediately rolled to the side, and another hole exploded on the ground. The spectators were shocked to the core. Since the start of the competition, this was the first time they had seen someone knock away a flying sword in a single exchange. Thinking about it, it must have something to do with the difference in cultivation between Yu Qianqiu and his opponent. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls were also frightened by the scene in front of them. The scene of Yu Qianqiu controlling 3 swords at the same time in the demon ghost region flashed through Ko Shuahua's mind. Her gaze fell on the flying sword that was stepped on, and her tightly furrowed eyebrows relaxed. She didn't know why, but after the attacking flying sword came out from the ground, It floated in the air and didn't attack again. The cultivation pavilion's disciple revealed an expression of a cat playing with a mouse. He jokingly said, "You are that Yu Qianqiu, right? You're only at the early stage of core formation, yet you dare to come here to join in the fun. You really don't know what's good for you. If you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, you can wait for the alchemy pavilion to collect your corpse." With that said, the flying sword threateningly pointed at Yu Qianqiu in the air and circled twice. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was so angry that he couldn't speak. He rolled up his sleeves and looked like he was going to fight desperately, but he was hugged tightly by Fernan. Yu Qianqiu stood up and spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. Then he suddenly burst into wild laughter. Contrasting with the bloodstains on his face and clothes, he looked somewhat ferocious as he roared, "Bullshit! I was considering whether or not to give the cultivation pavilion some face. Now that the emperor is here, don't expect me to let you go. You arrogant dog." His voice spread out in all directions. Everyone heard what he said clearly, and they were all stunned. None of them expected Yu Qianqiu to curse in front of so many people. It was truly a disgrace to him. The cultivation pavilion's disciple was stunned. He shouted with a livid face, "You're courting death. Courting your mother." Yu Qianqiu immediately shouted back. He made a hand sign and dozens of cold lights flashed out of his storage bag. One of the cold lights turned into a sword and carried him into the air. The other 50 cold lights turned into a sword umbrella and protected his back. Under the bright sun in the sky, the sword umbrella emitted a dazzling golden light. The people around almost couldn't see Yu Qianqiu clearly in the sword circle in the air. Chapter 155. What was going on? The people watching were all dumbfounded. They saw Yu Qianqiu floating majestically in the air like a god, and behind him was a shining golden wheel. Some disciples were positioned at the angle of refraction of the sunlight, and they couldn't open their eyes because of the dazzling light. Feng Xiangtian and the elders in the pavilion looked at each other. No one had seen this kind of sword technique before. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly. The cultivation pavilion's disciples' expression changed. The flying sword sped up and shot toward Yu Qianqiu in the air. Yu Qianqiu coldly snorted and stretched out 2 fingers to point at the sword umbrella. 3 cold lights suddenly shot out from the sword umbrella behind him, clashing with the incoming flying swords. A series of clanking sounds rang out as the 4 flying swords fought in the air. As for the others, there were still a few disciples who had yet to decide a victor in their battles. They all stopped fighting and looked over at the battle over here. The commotion over here was too big. Yu Qianqiu released 3 flying swords. One of them entangled the opponent's flying sword, and they kept clashing head-on. Although his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, he was fast. When one sword was knocked away, the other one would follow up. Of the 3 flying swords, one was always facing off against the opponent's flying sword, while the other 2 would seize the opportunity to strike the opponent's sword with their sharp sword light. It was a bit like the 3 heroes versus Lu Bu. In short, the 3 flying swords trapped the sword, not giving it any chance to escape. This was because his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, so he could only win by outnumbering the opponent. In the beginning, Yu Qianqiu was worried that the opponent's cultivation level was too high, and he would be injured if the flying swords collided with it. After calming himself down a few times, he felt relieved. It was not because of the difference in cultivation level between the 2, but because he was not prepared at the beginning, and was successfully ambushed. When he was in Utopia, this situation did not happen when he was sparring with the 3 company commanders who were at the late nascent soul stage. It was purely because he was careless. However, this provided a very good way for him to fight in the future. Sneak attacks were definitely a good choice. Now that he had nothing to worry about, it was time to deal with this guy. Yu Qianqiu looked down and cackled. "You dog, see how I'll deal with you." He stretched out 2 fingers and pointed with the driving sword art. The sword umbrella behind him released 2 rays of cold light that flew towards the cultivation pavilion's disciple. After being tricked by him just now, Yu Qianqiu also had thoughts of revenge. The two beams of cold light did not kill the opponent very quickly, and the opponent always managed to dodge it. That person was rolling on the ground and jumping around. Just as his figure flashed, the flying sword pierced a hole in the ground. As for the sword that he stepped on just now, Yu Qianqiu kept it for his own use. Bang bang bang. The sound of explosions rang out one after another. There was not a single piece of limestone laid on the sixth stage that was left intact. There were potholes everywhere. That person was immediately forced into a difficult situation by the three flying swords. His initial arrogance and complacency had long since disappeared. Right now, he was desperately running for his life. In the eyes of the bystanders, he was even more frightened and in a precarious situation. He didn't know when he would be slaughtered. His appearance was indeed a bit shameful. Dog, if you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, just wait for the cultivation pavilion to collect your corpse. Kaka. Yu Qianqiu laughed arrogantly. He completely threw that person's words back at him. After a round of torture, that disciple did indeed have thoughts of admitting defeat. However, he couldn't kneel down and admit defeat even if he was beaten to death. If he really did that, he feared that the cultivation pavilion would no longer be able to tolerate him. At this moment, the people with the most complicated feelings were none other than the disciples of the cultivation pavilion. Each and every one of their faces sank. When did a main faction disciple get forced into this state by a subsidiary faction disciple? This was truly a disgrace to the cultivation pavilion. Gu Qingyun's expression was indescribably gloomy. From the standpoint of a friend, he should hope that Yu Qianqiu would win. From the standpoint of reputation, he naturally hoped that the main faction disciple would win. After all, he was a member of the cultivation pavilion. And if he lost face, he would also be implicated. Thinking a little more, Gu Qingyun gnashed his teeth in anger. That fellow was truly hateful. Leaving aside the fact that he sneak attacked, it was fine if he took advantage of Qin Wentian at the start. But why did he have to say such harsh words? Now, Qin Wentian had sent his words back to Gu Qingyun. Gu Qingyun didn't even have a path to retreat. If it was a normal win or loss, then no one would say anything. Just like Lu Guang at the beginning. But things had become like this. The two of them bullied and scolded each other, implicating the two factions behind them. Right now, it was no longer a matter of two people, but a matter of the reputation of the two factions. It was a matter of life and death, and no one could take a step back. The majority of the disciples of the cultivation pavilion had the same thoughts as Gu Qingyun. The disciples of the other factions were extremely excited. Yu Qianqiu had really made the subsidiary factions proud. The number 6 arena was still rumbling nonstop. The arena with a radius of tens of meters was already much shorter than the surrounding area. That disciple was also suffering in silence. He was still fleeing in all directions, and his whole body was already covered in sweat. Seeing that he refused to admit defeat, Yu Qianqiu sneered and prepared to kill him. However, from the beginning, he had no intention of letting him go, even though he had already admitted defeat. Bastard, I don't want to play with you anymore. Hand over your life. Yu Qianqiu shouted loudly. He pointed with his finger, and the dazzling sword wheel behind him split into 10 rays of sword light. Xiu xiu. The rays of sword light quickly rushed down. Ah! That disciple suddenly shouted and raised his hand. A golden bracelet on his wrist flashed with a golden light. In an instant, that golden light enveloped his entire body. More than 10 rays of cold light that were shooting at high speed collided with the bracelet, making ding-ding-dang-dang sounds. One after another, they were all knocked away. F***CK. What is this? Yu Qianqiu looked down in a daze. The surrounding people were also in an uproar. Diamond bracelet. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was startled at first. Then he turned his head and said angrily, Eldero, what is the meaning of this? How can you allow a disciple to bring a magic weapon into the arena? This is too unfair to the other disciples. Oci glanced at him and said expressionlessly, Who said that magic weapons can't be brought into the arena? Who allowed your alchemy pavilion disciple to bring so many flying swords into the arena? Isn't this unfair to the other disciples? That's because of the sword technique he cultivates. He can control so many flying swords at the same time, so it doesn't matter if he brings more flying swords. Guan Weiwu defended himself. His own disciple was about to win, but the other side actually brought out a magic weapon. How could he not be angry? That diamond bracelet wasn't given to him by the cultivation pavilion. When he went out to cultivate, he killed a demonic path disciple and obtained it with his own ability. Why can't he use something that belongs to him? Wuxia sneered, then suddenly turned his head and said in a deep voice, Guan Weiwu, who gave you the right to speak to me like this? Guan Weiwu was stunned. Wuxia's cultivation had reached the peak of the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage. He was a bit stronger than the sect leader. According to seniority in the outside world, he was his father's junior brother. He was a generation older than the sect leader, and belonged to the same branch of the Guan family. Senior brother. You be the judge. Guan Weiwu didn't dare to show his power and could only look for his senior brother, the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian looked down, paused, and said, a magic weapon obtained with one's own ability is naturally a part of one's strength. This is fair to everyone. The two of you don't need to argue anymore. Although the last sentence seemed to be reprimanding the two of them, in general, it was obvious that he was on Wuxia's side. Yes, sect leader. Wuxia responded with a smile, and looked down without saying anything. Guan Weiwu's face twitched, but he also had nothing to say. Chapter 156. After the disciple was enveloped by the golden light barrier, he let out a breath and his expression gradually calmed down. Yu Qianqiu didn't believe it, and controlled his flying sword to attack again. After a series of clanging sounds, the thin, transparent barrier didn't react at all. What a powerful magic treasure! The disciples of the various factions felt that it was a pity. Yu Qianqiu was about to win, but his opponent actually came up with such a thing. Xiao Wanqing turned to Ko Xuehua and asked, Martial Ant Ko, what is that egg-shaped light barrier? It has such a strong defense. I think Yu Qianqiu's flying sword can't do anything to it. Ko Xuehua stared at the location of the competition and frowned. It's the Vajra bracelet, a top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure. The light barrier it emits is called the Vajra barrier. As long as the cultivator using this treasure has enough vitality, even an early-stage tribulation-passing cultivator won't be able to break it. I just don't know how such a magic treasure fell into the hands of a late-stage core formation cultivator. Ah, a top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure? Xiao Wanqing was stunned. Even in a large sect like the supporting Immortal Island, only nascent soul cultivators could get a low-grade magic treasure. Usually, it was only an offensive magic treasure. A top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure could almost be considered a low-grade high-grade magic treasure. It should be known that magic treasures that could protect one's life were very difficult to refine. Not everyone had the opportunity to obtain one. With one in hand, it wouldn't be a problem to protect one's life. After all, in the cultivation world, as long as you weren't too unlucky, you wouldn't always encounter mid-stage tribulation-passing opponents. The disciple in the barrier took out a handful of qi recovery pills and put one in his mouth. He stared at Yu Qianqiu with a gloomy expression. Xiao Wanqing said regretfully, he still has qi recovery pills. It seems that even Yu Qianqiu can't do anything to him. In each faction, there were seniors like Ko Xuehua who knew what was good for them. Soon, the news that the disciple was using the Vajra bracelet spread. Everyone felt that it was a pity. It seemed that no one could do anything to the other. After Yu Qianqiu struck the light barrier for a while, he lost his temper and couldn't help but curse. You coward! If you have the guts, then come out and fight me fair and square. What are you hiding in there for? You shameless thing. A grand late core formation disciple is actually scared of an early core formation cultivator like this. If you have the guts, then get the hell out here. How could the true cultivation pavilion produce trash like you? Damn it. Damn it. Aside from sneak attacks, you only know how to hide like a turtle. Today, I've learned the skills of the cultivation pavilion. The disciple looked at Yu Qianqiu with resentment and cursed loudly. He clenched his fists so hard that they made popping sounds. Even if he left the competition alive today, he wouldn't have the face to see anyone after being tormented by Yu Qianqiu like this. After the impulse, he calmed down. However, his expression was frighteningly gloomy. After all, his life was more important. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't have to worry about not having a chance to take revenge. The disciples of the cultivation pavilion who were watching from the sidelines were so angry at Yu Qianqiu that they gnashed their teeth. If he cursed, then so be it. Why did he have to curse the entire cultivation pavilion? Those words were too hurtful. All the elders in the pavilion looked at each other in dismay. They had never seen such a thing happen in all the previous competitions, and they had never seen a disciple like Yu Qianqiu who didn't even have the least bit of pretense, and was like a shrew who threw a tantrum in public. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were a little dumbfounded. The former had never seen this side of his disciple. It was really too much. The latter did not expect his future son-in-law to be like this. Although he had seen Yu Qianqiu act shamelessly in the 10,000 fragrance garden, he had never seen such a shameless act in public. Osihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. As the principal elder of the cultivation pavilion, how could he be happy when he saw someone pointing at the cultivation pavilion's nose and cursing like this, let alone in front of so many people? He turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Guan Weiwu, is this your personal disciple?" "That Elder, he might have been muddled by the sneak attack of your disciple. I will definitely scold him when I get back." While Guan Weiwu was apologizing, he heard his disciple on the other side was still cursing without restraint. His vulgarities were increasing, and the more he cursed, the uglier it was. Guan Weiwu smiled apologetically and wiped his forehead. Feng Xiangtian also frowned. His lips moved a few times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. This competition was originally for the disciples to fight with their lives. To put it bluntly, no matter what method you used to win, it was still a part of your strength. His disciple almost lost his life in the beginning, so a few curses like this was nothing. It was just that it was indeed a little outrageous. The disciples of the various sects had seen it today. A competition could actually be like this? They did not know if Yu Qianqiu had won glory for the auxiliary disciples today, or if he had lost face. All of them were speechless as they listened to him cursing in different ways. Gu Qingyan, who was in the cultivation pavilion's crowd, was dumbfounded and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing's small red lips froze for a while before she turned to look at the crowd and said embarrassedly, "Is that really Yu Qianqiu?" She really did not expect that the mighty and omnipotent Yu Qianqiu in her heart would actually have this side to him. It completely overturned her image in her heart. Those people that Yu Qianqiu had saved from the demon ghost region were the same. Was this still the same Yu Qianqiu who sang and played the zither in the demon ghost region and chatted cheerfully with the ghost general? Bastard coward son of a B***tc. Yu Qianqiu stood in the air for a long time and cursed for a long time. Seeing that the other party was not moved by his provocation, he finally stopped. He immediately felt his true essence was a little exhausted, and his mouth was a little dry. He immediately took out a handful of energy recovery pills and stuffed them all into his mouth like candy. After recovering his true essence, he held his chin and flew around the Vajra barrier a few times. Suddenly, he slapped his forehead as if he had suddenly realized something and reached his hand into his storage bag. This made the disciple below nervous, not knowing what he was going to do. Yu Qianqiu took out a few yellow talismans and laughed sinisterly. How could he have forgotten about the astral breaching talismans made by Chen Feng? He had wasted so much saliva. Whether it was useful or not, he had to try it first. He took out a talisman with 2 fingers and slowly raised it up. It immediately attracted everyone's attention. The disciple immediately felt that something was wrong. He immediately poured a large amount of true essence into the Vajra bracelet. The golden light barrier immediately became golden, clearly strengthening its defensive capabilities. A yellow light shot out from Yu Qianqiu's hand towards the Vajra barrier. With a loud bang, the disciple and the barrier were blasted several times. When he crawled up with a face full of fear, He found that the Vajra barrier was not damaged at all. He could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Damn! How can it be so sturdy? Again. Yu Qianqiu threw the astral breaching talismans one after another, causing a series of loud booms. The spectating disciples were speechless. Fernan, who was in the pavilion, frowned. It seems like the astral breaching talisman that can break nascent soul stage's true chi. Where did this kid get it? Elder Mo, who was a few steps away, shook his head with both hands on the railing. That disciple was vicious in the previous 2 rounds. This time he has met his nemesis. With his cultivation, I'm afraid that he will not be in a good state even if he does not get injured. Guan Weiwu, who was standing at the side, smiled. He was too embarrassed to continue protecting his disciple. Yu Qianqiu had a total of 6 astral breaching talismans. After using them all at once, he realized that they still could not do anything to him. The defense of the light barrier was too good. The disciple was blasted to the ground 6 times in a row. His face was deathly pale. Fortunately, he wasn't injured. He stared at his opponent in the air, as if his eyes were about to burst into flames. He raised his hand and stuffed another energy recovery pill into his mouth. What are you looking at? If you are not convinced, come out if you have the guts. Yu Qianqiu was very annoyed by his gaze. If he did not take the opportunity to kill him this time, he did not know what kind of revenge he would attract in the future. He immediately shouted, "An iron rod can be ground into a needle. I don't believe that I cannot break your tortoise shell." He put his palms together and his 10 fingers turned to form a shadow. It was as bright as a lotus flower. Dozens of cold lights appeared from his storage bag. The flying swords on his back also flashed. Nearly 100 flying swords danced in the air at the same time. It was a spectacular scene. Everyone had never seen a person control so many flying swords at the same time. They all stared at the sky in shock. Chapter 157. Yu Qianqiu floated in the air on his sword with a ruthless look on his face. Cold lights and shadows were everywhere around him, dancing all over the sky. When Yu Qianqiu moved in the air, there were nearly 100 cold lights following him. Every time his limbs moved, the sword shadows in the sky would be in a commotion. Everything was under his control, and his momentum was extraordinary. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the attic, suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, "If I remember correctly, there seems to be a set of sword skills in the Sutras depository called Good Yuan sword skill. The higher the cultivation, the more flying swords you can control. Yu Qianqiu should be practicing this set of sword skills." Osihai, who was beside him, nodded, then shook his head and said, "The Good Yuan sword skill doesn't seem to be so fast and powerful. Otherwise, many disciples would have practiced it." Feng Xiangtian's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "I'm afraid it has been modified by him. If that's the case, then this Yu Qianqiu's cultivation talent is really extraordinary." Osihai frowned and did not say anything. He did not believe what the head said. Modified the cultivation method? What a joke. The person who was most familiar with the cultivation method was the creator of the method. How could other people who practiced this method change it randomly? Unless he was not afraid of death or qigong deviation. In fact, both Feng Xiangtian and Osihai were right. However, the latter did not know that when Yu Qianqiu was modifying this sword technique, there were indeed many times when he almost went berserk. However, whenever his body was damaged or about to collapse, the golden bead in his body would display its miraculous effect, constantly repairing and maintaining his body. That was why Yu Qianqiu, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, changed this sword technique of Guthyuan into his own unique sword technique. As for his talent in cultivation, it probably had nothing to do with it. All the people who were familiar with Yu Qianqiu were stunned. They did not know how many more secrets this guy had. In short, once he did it, it was very eye-catching. Just when everyone was guessing what he was going to do, Yu Qianqiu stretched out 2 fingers and drew 2 circles in the air. Close to 100 flying swords followed his gestures and split into 2, forming 2 circles of swords behind him. In the eyes of the surrounding people, it was as if he had grown a pair of glowing wings on his back. The disciple hiding in the Vajra barrier panicked once more. Although the astral breaker talismans did not harm him, the explosion had caused his blood and chi to churn, making him feel unbearably uncomfortable. It took him a long time to calm down, but from the looks of it, the fellow in the sky was going to do something again. It was a matter of life and death, so it would be strange if he was not afraid. The light barrier protecting him became golden again. Quick! Yu Qianqiu shouted at the 2 circles of swords behind him. One of the 2 circles of swords behind him suddenly broke off, forming 2 long dragons on the left and right, pouncing toward the golden egg below. Immediately, a series of clanking sounds of metal colliding rang out. As the clanking sounds rang out, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers again. The 2 sword dragons once again formed 2 circles, connecting with each other in a circulatory cycle manner. They kept colliding with the golden egg, and the rapid and sharp sounds of collision rang out. This scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, as if the 2 wings on Yu Qianqiu's body had grown onto the golden egg below. Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers and pointed down. The 2 high-speed circles of swords immediately sped up, turning into 2 beams of light. The sounds of collision were no longer rapid, but a continuous, sharp, ear-piercing sound. After listening for a while, the crowd felt a sense of irritation in their chests. They felt flustered and immediately circulated their chi to resist. Yu Qianqiu looked down with a determined expression. He took out a handful of chi recovery pills and stuffed them into his mouth. Damn it! I'm going to drag it out with you today. I don't believe that this turtle shell can protect you forever. Everyone could see that he wanted to fight a protracted battle, but the noise was really disturbing and uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that the disciple in the light barrier was suffering 1,000 times more than the crowd. The sharp, bone-piercing sound was right beside his ears. He couldn't hide even if he wanted to. He could only sit down cross-legged and circulate his chi to resist. Elder Mo of the Artifact Refining Pavilion, who was on the pavilion, asked in surprise, "Old Guan, what is your disciple doing?" Guan Weiwu turned around and rolled his eyes at him. He thought to himself, "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" After a while, Elder Mo suddenly shouted, "Oh no, look at the disciple in the Vajra barrier." The people on the pavilion looked over. It was so far away that they couldn't see clearly. They immediately circulated their chi to take a closer look. When they saw clearly, they were all shocked. The disciple's face was pale and his body was trembling nonstop. His eyes, mouth, nose, ears, and other orifices were bleeding. His appearance was dispirited and miserable. It was obvious that he was injured. How could this be? Feng Xiangtian was also shocked. The group of elders looked at each other in dismay. Even with their cultivation and knowledge, no one could tell how Yu Qianqiu had injured that disciple. In fact, Yu Qianqiu himself didn't know what was going on. He was the closest to the disciple, so he was the first to notice the abnormality. At first, he saw that the disciple was shivering in the turtle shell. He didn't pay much attention to it. When he noticed that something was wrong, he focused and saw that the disciple was bleeding from his orifices. What was going on? After a while, Yu Qianqiu came to a realization. It was probably the high-intensity noise he made that injured the disciple. No matter what, he was someone who had lived in the technological era for so many years in his previous life. Of course, he knew that the sound waves produced by noise could also kill people. Damn. It was a lucky hit. So it was like this. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. The speed of the flying sword was raised to the limit. The ear-piercing sound made the people around them feel disturbed. Yu Qianqiu stared at the disciple's reaction in the turtle shell. When he saw that the disciple was shaking even more violently, he knew that he had guessed correctly. He stuffed another chi recovery pill into his mouth and thought, "Bastard, let's see how long you can resist." Not long after, everyone suddenly noticed that the light emitted by the Vajra shield was flickering. Even the disciples in the early stage of foundation establishment could see that something was wrong. Yu Qianqiu sneered again and again. He could clearly see that the person inside was not only bleeding from his 7 orifices, but even his pores were oozing blood. Yet he was still stubbornly resisting. It seemed that he was not far from death. Everyone in the attic naturally saw this. Elder Emo sighed and said, "I'm afraid it's almost over." Everyone had their own thoughts and were silent. Only Osihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. Ah! Suddenly the surroundings boiled. The Vajra shield on the cultivation pavilion disciple's body suddenly disappeared. His whole body was finally exposed. He was covered in blood and fell to the ground. Bang! Yu Qianqiu's face was full of joy as he shouted. After waiting for a long time, he finally succeeded. If he didn't act now, then when would he? He understood the principle of delay. Nearly 100 cold lights swarmed toward the disciple like a flock of crows fighting for food. Now everyone knew that the disciple was dead for sure. Osihai, who was in the attic, slammed his palm on the railing. His lips were tightly shut and his face was gloomy. He didn't say a word. Feng Xiangtian glanced at him and didn't say anything. On the other hand, Guan Weiwu was a bit like a thief. His disciple defeated his opponent, but he didn't show any joy. Instead, he secretly looked at the people on both sides. With a burst of blood mist, the flying swords completed their mission. They turned into cold lights and flashed back into Yu Qianqiu's storage pouch. When the blood mist dissipated, there was nothing left except a pool of blood on the ground. Yu Qianqiu floated to the ground. The long sword under his feet fell into his hand. He walked to the pool of blood, picked up the bloody bracelet with his sword, and put it into his storage pouch. He casually threw the sword back into the scabbard on his back, and walked toward the alchemy pavilion disciples, as if nothing had happened. Chapter 158. Silence. The surroundings were very quiet. Everyone was still immersed in the moment when the flying sword dismembered the body. No one could have imagined that a flying sword could be used to such a bloody extent that not even a piece of flesh or bone could be found. The most frightening thing was that with Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, he was actually able to break the middle-grade defensive magic treasure, the Vajra bracelet. No one could see how he did it. In any case, the person inside was killed by him just like that. The first to wake up were the supervising elders. Because Yu Qianqiu's matches were too eye-catching, there were still a few matches that hadn't been decided and had already stopped. At this moment, under the reprimand of the elders, the matches continued. However, no one dared to kill each other anymore. Yu Qianqiu's previous actions were already very clear. Those who wanted to kill him had better not meet him, or else the consequences would be very tragic. Lu Guang and that disciple were in stark contrast. The former was unharmed while the latter's bones couldn't even be found. This competition was decided by drawing lots. Who could guarantee that they wouldn't meet Yu Qianqiu? Who still thought that they could beat Yu Qianqiu with their late core formation cultivation? In the end, the remaining people competed peacefully. After the winners and losers were decided, nothing happened. The spectators, on the other hand, felt that it wasn't intense enough and lacked interest. After the match was over, someone immediately came to the competition venue to repair the ground that had been smashed. The atmosphere over at the cultivation pavilion was oppressive. The disciples who were about to compete were all secretly thinking about who would be unlucky enough to meet Yu Qianqiu. Those who had killed in the previous 2 matches were even more nervous. Xiao Wanqing, who was on the 10,000 Fragrance Gardens side, felt that something was wrong. She didn't say anything and smiled like a flower. Her eyes flickered as she looked at the disciple who had just won. Her expression was worth thinking about. In reality, she wasn't the only one looking over. There were too many disciples from each faction to count. It was just that their gazes were different from hers. The disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion all looked as if they were on steroids. They stood there in high spirits, as if they were afraid that others wouldn't know they were disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion. Yang Qian grinned and said, "Yu Qianqiu, you sure hit it well. What? Are you going to defeat all the disciples of the Cultivation Pavilion?" Hearing this, the nearby disciples all gathered their heads, wanting to hear how Elder Guan's direct disciple would answer. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and said modestly, "Martial Uncle Yang thinks too highly of me. I was just lucky just now." The Cultivation Pavilion is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It's already not bad if I can enter the top 10. Ah, Martial Uncle you is too modest. That's right. Martial Uncle, don't stand on ceremony when the time comes. When it's time to strike, strike. This Martial Uncle you was usually very amiable and did not put on any airs. At this moment, the disciples from the alchemy pavilion were laughing and fanning the flames, causing the disciples from the other factions to be filled with envy. Disciples participating in the fourth round draw lots. Dongfang Chang Ao shouted. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands at the crowd, and as usual, walked over leisurely. Many of the disciples sighed in their hearts. Looking at how calm he was, it seemed he already had a card up his sleeve. This was the demeanor of an expert. This was the demeanor of a master. After 3 rounds of the competition, those who relied on luck or coincidence were almost all eliminated. The remaining people were definitely late core formation stage experts. Yu Qianqiu looked at the remaining 100 people and was slightly stunned. He found that they were all standing next to the lottery box and looking at him, not knowing what to do. While Yu Qianqiu was confused, Dongfang Chang Ao looked at the disciples in front of him and said in a low voice, Yu Qianqiu, come here and draw lots. Ah. Oh. Yu Qianqiu quickly ran over. No matter what the reason was, he had already offended the old guy, so he couldn't do it again. Just as his hand was about to reach into the lottery box, someone suddenly shouted from upstairs, Wait, Chang Ao, bring Yu Qianqiu up here. The 2 people who were called looked up and saw it was the sect leader, Feng Xiangtian. Yu Qianqiu was stunned again and then followed Dongfang Chang Ao into the cultivation pavilion's main hall. When he climbed to the top floor, he saw the sect leader and the other elders and quickly bowed. In his heart, he was trying to figure out why he was called up. All the old guy's attention was on Yu Qianqiu. Feng Xiangtian gently waved his hand and said, Chang Ao, pass on my decree. Yu Qianqiu is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to compete. You can go down first. Dongfang Chang Ao paused. This was completely against the rules of the competition, but since the sect leader said it was a decree, there was no problem. He immediately clasped his hands and said, Yes, sect leader. Then he left. What are these old guys doing? While Yu Qianqiu was puzzled, Dongfang Chang Ao's voice came from below. Pass on the sect leader's decree. Yu Qianqiu is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to draw lots. At first, there was an uproar outside, but then it quieted down. Everyone thought about it and agreed. With Yu Qianqiu's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter the top 10. To put it bluntly, there was no one left who could deal with his pile of flying swords. The remaining disciples were relieved when they heard this. Without that guy, it would be much safer. However, he didn't know that sect head Feng Xiangtian had other considerations. The Pavilion of Cultivation had been the foundation of supporting Immortal Island for thousands of years. If they continued to compete and were defeated by Yu Qianqiu along the way, then they would be in big trouble. The Pavilion of Cultivation would lose all of its face. Therefore, he decided to not let him compete in the later rounds, and use his authority as the sect head to let him directly enter the top 10. The group of old guys knew that after watching 2 rounds, none of the Cultivation Pavilion's core formation stage disciples were Yu Qianqiu's opponent. They naturally knew the sect leader's intention. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianqiu and smiled. Yu Qianqiu, don't think too much. I will ask you a few questions, and you have to answer me honestly. Can you do that? Yu Qianqiu's brain turned a few times. He bowed and said, Since the sect leader is asking, I will tell you everything I know. Very good. Feng Xiangtian nodded and smiled. Then let me ask you. The sword technique you practice is very powerful. What is it called? Where did it come from? Yu Qianqiu had thought of these questions a long time ago. Since he took it out to show off, he knew that this day would come sooner or later, so he was well prepared to deal with it. He replied respectfully. The sword technique I practice comes from the Sutra Pavilion. It is called the Guryuan sword technique, but... He paused and continued. But during the process of practicing, I found that there were some flaws in this technique. Therefore, I spent a lot of effort to improve it. I don't know if it is still the good Yuan sword technique. He wasn't clear about these things and didn't know what the consequences of saying these things would be. Everyone immediately gasped. This kid really changed the sword technique to practice. Such talent. Even those who have reached the final stage of the passing calamity stage wouldn't dare to casually change a technique to practice. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. The Guan clan has produced another talent. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand looked at each other with indescribable feelings. Feng Xiangtian smiled and revealed an as expected expression. He continued to ask, "How many flying swords can you control now? Where did these flying swords of yours come from?" "I have already reached the limit of flying swords I can control today. There are a total of 100 flying swords." As for the flying swords, I practiced the sword technique to a certain stage and didn't have any more flying swords to use, so I almost gave up on practicing this sword technique. In the end, I used up the 1,000 upper spiritual stones that the sect leader gave me. The flying swords were bought by senior brother Chung Gengqing from the Secular Objects Hall. Yu Qianqiu looked like he had no choice but to do so. "I see." Feng Xiangtian nodded and glanced at Guan Weiwu expressionlessly. He was furious. Yu Qianqiu started with alchemy and reached the early stage of the core formation stage in just a few years. Now he even created his own cultivation technique. Such talent was rare in the cultivation world. This muddle-headed master didn't know anything. Because he didn't have any flying swords to use, he almost forced me to give up on studying this sword technique. If I really gave up, who would see such a powerful sword technique on Fuxian Island today? This muddle-headed thing. Elder Mo, Yu Qianqiu can go to the equipment refining pavilion to get the magic tools he lacks for cultivation in the future. Try to cooperate if you can. Feng Xiangtian's voice was a little gloomy. Chapter 159. Yes, sect leader. After Elder Mo responded, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, "It's a pity to stay in the elixir refinery pavilion with such cultivation talent. It's better to transfer you to the cultivation pavilion." Yu Qianqiu didn't know how to answer this question, so he obediently pretended not to hear it. Osihai, who originally had a gloomy expression, raised his eyebrows inadvertently. He looked up and down at Yu Qianqiu and thought to himself, "That's right. Why didn't I think of it? With such cultivation talent, he should come to my cultivation pavilion. Isn't hiding in the elixir refinery pavilion a waste of talent? Besides, it's not shameful for a disciple to compete with another disciple." Osihai's expression relaxed, and he started to have ideas about Yu Qianqiu. "We all saw that disciple die under your sword just now. However, before the Vajra shield broke, that disciple had already bled to death. What magic art did you use?" Feng Xiangtian asked again. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and smiled. "I didn't use any magic art. He died from being noisy." "Noisy to death. Are you kidding me?" The group of old guys exchanged glances. "Nonsense," Osihai said coldly. A bunch of illiterates." Seeing that they didn't believe him, Yu Qianqiu bowed to Osihai and said, "If Elder O doesn't believe me, would you like to accompany me to do an experiment? Elder O will understand once you try." "How do I do it?" Osihai took a few steps forward. There was a large bell hanging low on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. Yu Qianqiu saw it when he came up. He walked in front of the bell and shook the baton to hit the bell. Dong! A dull and distant sound came from the top of the building. Everyone downstairs looked up, not knowing what was going on up there. Yu Qianqiu pointed to the bell with a little embarrassment and said, "Elder O, can you bend down and stand in the bell for a while?" Without saying a word, Osihai bent down and stood in the bell shouting, "You try, Dong." Before he finished speaking, the bell had been rung by Yu Qianqiu. From the bottom of the bell, Osihai's body could be seen trembling. After the buzzing sound stopped, Yu Qianqiu said with respect, "Elder O, you can come out now." After waiting for a while, Osihai came out with a strange look on his face. He hadn't prepared anything just now, so he was immediately shocked by the sound of the bell. "Elder O, what's wrong with you?" everyone asked when they saw his strange expression. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed in his heart. The old man must be suffering. Osihai shook his head and said dully, "It was so loud. I wasn't prepared and almost fainted." Guan Weiwu walked to the front of the bell and knocked it twice. He said hesitantly, "The sound is indeed loud, but it shouldn't be enough to make people faint. Old Phil, I'll go in and try. You knock it and see." After that, he also went in. Ferdinand rolled his eyes and walked over angrily. He shook the pestle and hit it hard. Plop! Guan Weiwu sat on the ground, covered his ears with his hands and rolled out. He climbed up shakily, but he was still a little unsteady. After a long time he calmed down and exhaled. So powerful. At this time, everyone knew that what Yu Qianqiu said was true, but they still didn't understand the reason. After all, they and Yu Qianqiu's ideas were completely different, so it was understandable. Feng Xiangtian pondered and said, "Yu Qianqiu, do you mean that the disciple died because of your noise?" "Yes," Yu Qianqiu said respectfully. "That disciple was hiding inside the Vajra barrier. I used my flying swords to continuously attack it. The sound he heard inside was 1,000 times louder than what we heard outside. After a while, no one would be able to endure it. Naturally, he was shaken to death." Yu Qianqiu had originally wanted to explain to them what noise and sound waves were, but after thinking about it, he figured that they wouldn't understand, so he didn't say anything. It was enough to let them understand the general meaning, so that they wouldn't be long-winded. Everyone looked at each other. It was the first time they knew that sound could kill. Feng Xiangtian nodded and said, "Yu Qianqiu, why do you want to participate in this competition?" Yu Qianqiu said respectfully, "I want to go out and broaden my horizons." "Then you should know that the outside is not like the inside of Fuxian Island. There are dangers at all times. Aren't you afraid?" Feng Xiangtian said. "How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain? I'm not afraid," Yu Qianqiu replied solemnly. The group of old guys nodded. Feng Xiangtian smiled and said, "How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain?" "Well said, he. Yu Qianqiu, you can leave first." Yu Qianqiu bowed to everyone and was about to leave. Osihai said, "Yu Qianqiu, the Vajra bracelet belongs to a disciple of the cultivation pavilion. It should be taken back. Seeing that you are going out to gain experience, the cultivation pavilion will give it to you to protect yourself." Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thanked him and left. The group of elders stared at Osihai strangely. Elder Mo said, "Elder O, when did you become so generous?" Osihai glared at him and ignored him. He followed the sect leader to stand in front of the railing to watch the competition below. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianqiu walking away and sighed. Through this conversation, he was very fond of Yu Qianqiu. At such a young age with such talent, his future was limitless. Unfortunately, he was not his own personal disciple. Thinking of this, he glanced at Guan Weiwu and sighed in his heart. Since the following competition had nothing to do with him, Yu Qianqiu was too lazy to watch anymore. He said goodbye to the disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion and left the Cultivation Pavilion's territory. He flew straight to the Alchemy Pavilion on his sword. When the other disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion saw that Yu Qianqiu had left, they also felt that there was no point in the competition and left. The disciples of each faction also came for Yu Qianqiu. When the main character left, they all left one after another. The entire square was suddenly left with the Cultivation Pavilion performing a one-man show. The group of old guys in the Alchemy Pavilion finally understood who the main character of this competition was. In the following days, Yu Qianqiu did not watch any of the finals and nascent soul stage competitions. He did what he was supposed to do. He did not know that his name had once again spread throughout supporting Xian Island, causing a group of Qi condensation stage disciples who had no chance to watch the competition to be filled with regret. They often pestered the seniors who had watched the competition to talk about it. As for the so-called seniors of the various lineages, they were filled with admiration for Yu Qianqiu. When they spoke, they couldn't help but add oil and vinegar. As a result, a climax of learning from Yu Qianqiu was set off in supporting Immortal Island. In particular, when it was said that Yu Qianqiu cultivated the Guthyuan sword technique of the Sutra Pavilion, a group of Qi condensation stage disciples were amazed. It turned out that supporting Xian Island had such a powerful sword technique. They immediately set their cultivation goal on the Guthyuan sword technique after they reached the foundation establishment stage. The Sutra Pavilion was also very lively these days. Some foundation establishment stage disciples all went to study the Guthyuan sword technique. As a result, a scene that had not been seen on supporting Xian Island for thousands of years appeared. There were tens of thousands of disciples on supporting Xian Island. Because there was only one sword technique, and it could not be taken out, those who came could only memorize it. As a result, countless foundation establishment stage disciples lined up in the Sutra Pavilion. Some people saw that the scene was so lively, and they were afraid that they would not be able to line up. They even brought food to line up overnight. Of course, some people with higher cultivation levels also came. Everyone had seen the competition that day, so they naturally wanted to see what was so special about the Guthyuan sword technique. It actually allowed Yu Qianqiu to kill disciples with higher cultivation levels than him. It was really worth learning from. Chapter 160. A few days later, the results of the competition were out. 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples were confirmed. Yu Qianqiu got what he wanted, so he was naturally one of them. Furong knew that Yu Qianqiu was going to leave tomorrow, so she spent the entire day in Alchemy Pavilion, Yu Qianqiu's exclusive courtyard. The two of them were about to part, so it was inevitable that they would say some sweet nothings. The stone table in the courtyard was filled with food. Naturally, it was brought by a certain someone. Furong sat on the side with an unhappy expression. She pouted and said, "What am I going to do if you leave? If I had known earlier, I would have gone to participate in the competition." Knowing that she didn't want to part with him, Yu Qianqiu smiled but didn't say anything. He thought, if you want to participate in the competition, your old man won't agree even if you beat him to death. In this shitty sect, killing people doesn't even happen in the blink of an eye. It's as normal as eating a damn meal. This girl. After her face was healed, she was clearly more cheerful than before. She also talked more. Unfortunately, her personality was still a bit introverted. But that was also good. She was so beautiful. If she was too extroverted, she would definitely make him wear a green hat. She was a beauty. It was like this. If you didn't provoke others, there would be others who would provoke you. Qianqiu, you're the most resourceful. Think of a way to bring me out as well. Furong's smile was like a flower. She got up and picked up the wine pot, pouring wine for Yu Qianqiu and flattering him. Yu Qianqiu was pestered by her for a long time. It really was a bit of a headache. His eyes turned and he suddenly stared at Furong's chest. What's wrong? Furong saw that his gaze was strange. She also looked at her chest, but didn't find anything abnormal. It could be seen that Furong was already used to his actions. Yu Qianqiu shook his head solemnly and said, "That's not right. It seems to be a lot bigger than last time. What's going on?" "Really?" Furong suspiciously looked at her chest. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Yu Qianqiu's snickering. She immediately understood that he was teasing her again. Blushing, she threw the wine cup in her hand at him. Yu Qianqiu dodged to the side and grabbed her wrist, pulling her into his arms. He chuckled and said, "Look at you, a girl. How can you touch a man in broad daylight? Aren't you afraid of being seen by others?" Furong herself didn't know what was going on, but every time she was pulled into his embrace, she would feel as if her whole body had lost all its strength. He struggled weakly and said, "Who told you to always bully me?" "Nonsense. Why would I bully you? If I say it's big, then it's big. You don't believe me? I'll bring you in for a checkup right now." Yu Qianqiu abruptly picked her up and walked into the room, causing Hibiscus to cry out in alarm again. Quack. Scream. Scream. I'm the only one living here. Even if you shout yourself hoarse, no one will know. Not long after, The sound of two people fighting came from the room again. The two of them were lying on the bed with their clothes disheveled. Yu Qianqiu's fingers had already felt a moist spot. He wanted to explore it again, but the beauty beside him said no. Immediately, his fingers were clamped by the elastic thighs. Yu Qianqiu groaned in infinite sorrow. He pulled out his sinful hand and cursed in his heart. Damn it! These days where I can see and touch but not eat are too torturous. Lousy sex is emptiness, emptiness is sex. Amitba. I'll endure. 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 The two of them lazily hugged each other. Furong suddenly asked, "When will you come back?" Yu Qianqiu answered half-dead, "I don't know. I probably won't be back for a while." The two of them sank into silence again. The soft hand on Yu Qianqiu's chest suddenly rose up. She grabbed his trembling hand and pressed it on her plump breasts. Yu Qianqiu was startled. He turned his head and smiled bitterly. "I say, little sister. Big brother, I have already endured very hard. Don't seduce me anymore." Furong let out an almost inaudible sound. She whimpered, "I'll give it to you." "What did you say?" Yu Qianqiu sat up. His eyes swept back and forth across that alluring body. He said very seriously, "I'm very pure. It's very easy for me to believe other people's words. You must not speak carelessly. The God is watching. Repeat what you said just now. I didn't hear it clearly." Furong's face flushed red. She didn't dare to repeat it. She turned her graceful body to the side and didn't say another word. Yu Qianqiu laughed mischievously. He leaned over to her ear and asked, "You're not afraid anymore?" Furong softly replied, "N. Jie Jie." Yu Qianqiu looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. "Cake seller. Long live Chairman Mao." Then he pounced on her as if he was starving. The spring night was bitter and short. The sun rose high in the sky. The hibiscus bloomed to express the feelings of spring. It was a splendid night. Only the two people in the room knew about it. Yu Qianqiu looked down at Furong's smooth and tender body. In his previous life, he walked among flowers. He had plucked countless flowers. He was very experienced. But in this life, he was still a virgin. He didn't expect Furong to take advantage of this era's essence. It wasn't easy. While she was sleeping soundly, Yu Qianqiu quietly got up and put on his clothes. Just as he turned around, he saw a pair of extremely bashful big eyes looking at him. He couldn't help but smile awkwardly. "You're awake?" He hated the sadness of parting. He wanted to sneak away. "Are you leaving? I'll send you." Furong picked up a piece of clothing to cover her chest. Suddenly she frowned. Biting her lips, she stubbornly got off the bed and put on her clothes. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the bed that was dotted with red spots. Then he looked at Furong's strange walking posture. He thought to himself, "Oh no, it was Furong's first night yesterday. I was a little too indulgent." He couldn't help but smile bitterly. "How are you going to send me off like this? Aren't you afraid that others will see through you?" No. After walking a few steps, she also realized that something was wrong. She couldn't say the rest of her words. Yu Qianqiu walked downstairs to stop her. He gently whispered in her ear, "Be obedient. There's no need to send me off. I just want to tell you that I will always think of you. You just wait for me in Wanfen Garden. You have to work hard to cultivate. Do you understand?" "Yes." Furong nodded, feeling wronged. Yu Qianqiu gently pushed her away. He opened the door and flew straight to Penglai Pavilion on his sword. He faintly heard the sound of crying. In front of Penglai Pavilion, 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples led by Elder Quan of the Cultivation Pavilion were ready to leave. There were many onlookers. Yu Qianqiu saw his master Guan Weiwu waving at him from the crowd. He couldn't help but feel touched. This muddle-headed master actually remembered that he was leaving today. It was really rare. Thus he happily ran over and bowed, saying, "Disciple will be leaving now. Master, please take care." I know. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and suddenly said with a voice transmission, "The leader, Quan Deming, is my junior brother. I have already told him that if you have any trouble, you can look for him. He will help you." Yu Qianqiu thanked him and returned to the group. Suddenly he heard another voice transmission. "Humph. Furong didn't return last night. Did she spend the night at your place? Damn. It was father-in-law Fei's voice. Yu Qianqiu looked around and found Ferdinand, who was glaring at him in the crowd. He was stunned. He had already slept with his daughter. What else could he say? Yu Qianqiu bowed respectfully. After talking with the sect leader, Quan Deming and Elder Quan returned to the front of the group. He glanced at everyone and shouted in a deep voice, "Let's go." With that, he took the lead and flew away on his sword. Swoosh swoosh. 15 flying swords shot out and 15 figures quickly followed. Below, countless people showed envious eyes. The wind whistled in Yu Qianqiu's ears. He slightly slowed down and looked back in the direction of the alchemy pavilion. He didn't know if that woman was still crying in his room. He felt guilty and exhaled. He suddenly turned back, and his sword turned into a stream of light. He quickly chased after the group in front of him. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.